This actually happened to me when I was a kid. I'm a girl and was 8 years old when this happened. I grew up with my mom and my stepfather in an apartment in Chicago at the time. So my stepfather was a crackhead. He used, I'm pretty certain, every day. He was a pretty good father considering he was high all the time. I felt way more close to him than I ever did with my mother. We spent tons of time together after his morning walks. His habit got really bad. My mother was the only one who could work since he kept getting fired. My mother recently got new furniture, a whole living room set, 2 couches, lamps, end tables, rugs, and she even got a new TV. She was pretty proud and happy, mainly because she was able to hide enough money away from my stepfather to buy everything. A few days after she got everything, my mom and I went to Burger King. We came back to the apartment. My mother opened the door and her smile dropped. There was absolutely nothing in the living room. She told me to check my things. My bike, all my video games, my TV, and clarinet were all gone as well. There were quite a few other things missing from the apartment. You already know who the culprit is, my stepfather. Apparently he owed some money for drugs. He said he had no choice. They said to pay up or it'd be everything he loves. As you know, his habit was very, very bad. Now to the meat of the story. One day I woke up to my stepfather calling me. It was pretty early. The sun had just started to peek into my room. I got up and heard him talking in the kitchen to someone frantically. I couldn't hear much since my door was closed, but I remember making out a little bit. He said, "Man, she's beautiful. And you won't be disappointed." I slipped on my house shoes trying to figure out who he was talking to. I heard one response, but the voice was very deep, so I couldn't tell what was said. It was strange for anybody to be visiting our apartment, especially strange since it was this early. I have a straight line of sight to the kitchen. I see my stepfather nervously fidgeting, pacing and talking. He saw me and said, "Here she is, man." I stood in my doorway and tried to give him the look of, "Who in the world are you talking to?" He motioned for me to come in. I walked into the kitchen and I saw a tall, older white man with shades looking back. Maybe he was late 40s. He was balding, had a short beard, and was dressed very nicely. My father said, "Here she is. What do you think?" My parents tend to show me off to people for some reason, so this wasn't odd to me. The man looked at me, I presume, and looked back at my stepfather. My stepfather had the most nervous smile on his face I have ever seen. My father told me to give a twirl. I was not twirling in front of this strange guy, and definitely not this early. So he forcefully turned me. He held my nightgown taut so it was fitting against my body, and he said, "Not bad, right?" I pushed his hands off of me. This was clearly very, very strange now. I did not understand what was going on, but I knew something wrong was happening. The entire time the white man said nothing, just watched me. My stepfather said, "You're gonna have to go with him now." I frowned and asked why, but before I could really start, the white man spoke. He squatted down to my height, smiled, and asked, "How old are you?" I said nervously, "I'm 8. He said, "You're a big girl then. Do you like school?" I said, "I love school." This little conversation and his smile made me feel a little bit at ease. I look over the man's shoulder and see my stepfather frowning and glaring at me, and it scares me. I've not seen him look like that except for at suspicious people to warn them not to mess with him. I keep looking back at my stepfather, trying to answer this man's questions, knowing I said something wrong for my stepfather's reaction. The white man glances back at my stepfather, while still squatted down at my height. My stepfather looks away in fear. The man stands up, looks back down at me, and says, "It was nice talking with you. You're a very smart young lady. Now go back to bed." I was not used to anyone giving me orders except at school or my parents, but I knew not to question it, and I walked off to my room. I looked back and he was watching me. I stood inside my room at the door and looked back again. He said, "Close your door and go back to bed." I looked at him and he smiled back, and he motioned for me to go on. I closed the door and sat on my bed. I hear the man say something to my father in an angry voice. I heard my stepfather begging very loudly, "Please, please take her." The kitchen has a door leading to the outside staircase. My window was pretty close to it. I hear the kitchen door open, so I slid my window open a crack. I hear my stepfather repeatedly begging please. The man yelled, "She's a fucking kid." I tried to peek out to the staircase. There were two large men standing there near the door and on the stairs. The white man punches my stepfather, presumably. I can't really see the whole scene. I just hear a thud inside and outside. I suppose it's from him falling. The white man and the two men walk down the stairs to the nice black car parked on the alley. I hear the kitchen door close, and soon after, my bedroom door opens. My stepfather is drenched in sweat and smiles at me sheepishly and says casually not to tell my mother. I just stared at him. He then asked, did I want to go to the park? I said no. He walks away and left the apartment. I sat there trying to put the pieces together. It clicked that my own stepfather was trying to sell me, more than likely to pay off a huge drug debt. Then everything else fell into place. The strange, oddly friendly white man considered taking me. Why would he take me? What would he do with me? Where would I go? What about my mom? Feelings of fear, anger, and sadness flooded over me. I laid there and cried for hours, thinking about how close I was to never seeing my mom again, and that my stepfather planned to do this to me. My mother eventually leaves him some years later. I still haven't told her about it, afraid she might lose it. I'm 26 now, and it's still hard to think about without crying. I work the late night shift to pay for university and come home at midnight. I share a house with my mom and park my car in the garage. You can open with a remote control. You can get straight into the house through the door that connects the garage from the basement, which I normally do except for Thursday, where I go around the house to pull out the trash cans onto the street and then enter the main door. Our house is surrounded by tall bushes, so you can't see much from the street. It's a small rural village, and I know all the neighbors very well. On a Thursday night, I returned from my shift, and when I drove onto the street, I noticed an unfamiliar car with its headlights on. Since I know my neighborhood so well, I was kinda confused about the car, but couldn't see the license plate nor the person sitting in the car clearly, since the lights was blinding me. You only drive onto our street when you live there or visit someone, since it only circled back to the main road. I opened the gate and the garage door remotely and drove inside. From that point, I can only see the street through the gate, since the bushes are so high on both sides. I normally would have left the car and walked outside to grab the trash cans, but that day, I got a long voice message from a friend and stayed in my car to listen to it. 7 minutes into the message, I lift my gaze and looked into the rearview mirror, and I see a man standing in my driveway behind my car. He didn't move in anyway. He just stood perfectly still and watching me. I panicked and locked the doors, then grabbed the remote and closed the extremely slow garage gate. I just sat there for a moment and was too scared to leave the car, since I couldn't be sure that he didn't enter the garage before the door hit the floor. I also had to call my mom because the garage door into the basement was locked, since I had planned on using the main door. She later told me that she immediately went into the window. She could overview the streets since she lives on the first floor, but couldn't see the man or the car at the point. I told myself it was probably a neighbor who didn't think about how creepy he acted, and I didn't recognize in the dark. But I asked around and nobody knew the man. I only got the information that the type of car was seen slowly driving around our neighborhood. My mom thinks it was somebody that wanted to surprise me and force me to let them into the house to rob us. My grandmother had just died, and nobody knew that my mom spent the nights over. She thinks he waited behind the bushes and got impatient or confused when I didn't exit the car. We never found out who it was. When I was young, I'd say 8 to 11-ish, my sister, whom is 7 years older than me, would babysit me when my parents were out. At the time, she smoked a lot, and my parents made her smoke outside, of course. So I'd follow her outside into the carport, which faced towards the street, and play around, annoy her and such. One day my sister notices a car at the end of the driveway, just sitting in the road. It's a white SUV with a bike rack on top. It had the most tinted windows I have ever seen. You could not see inside from the side. It sat there until she went inside, and then it would drive to the end of the road and sit by the church parking lot and wait until she'd come out again for another smoke, and it would repeat this. Odd, but my sister is a brave lady and kinda just ignored it. That is, until the next day, while my parents were out again and it showed up again. It would just sit at the end of the driveway and just watch. I don't know what the driver was doing, but he was watching my sister. If I didn't go out, I'd watch from the front window and it would just sit there and watch my sister. She told my father, who was a sheriff deputy at the time, and he called the cops and made a complaint. They showed up, looked around, but the SUV was nowhere to be seen. Months went by and nothing. Then one day, a good 9 months after this had all started, and 4 since the last sighting, it was back. It became a regular occurrence again. Another day, my sister was outside doing her nasty habit, and sure enough, here it comes. This time, we were alone as usual, and she decides she's had enough. She tells me to stay in the carport and she was going to confront them. She started walking towards the SUV, and halfway down the driveway, she would later remark to us, "I felt utter terror, like I knew if I went any further I was dead. I was paralyzed by pure fear." She turned around and went inside. Finally, the family car was in the shop for some kind of issue, so we were all stuck home for the night. While my parents are home, my sister goes outside to smoke. I go outside with her, and eventually the SUV shows up. She told me to run inside and tell my father, and I do. My dad promptly gets his gun and starts briskly walking down the driveway, with it in hand, in the direction of the SUV, but not level towards it. The SUV floored it down the road and peeled out onto the nearby large highway. My dad, being a cop, noted the year and model and distinguishing features. The scariest thing, the license plate had been covered in duct tape. We never saw it again, and my sister kinda shrugs it off now. When I was 16, I worked the closing shift at a fast food restaurant. Our restaurant didn't close until midnight, and I wouldn't get home until 2 in the morning most nights. This was like any other night. I would usually get home and eat and watch TV. No, this was the 90s and we had an old console TV. You had to pull a button to turn it on, and push it in to turn it off, as well as turn it side to side to set the volume. After I unwound and eventually got tired, I turned off the TV that I was watching quietly because my parents' room was right next to the living room. I headed upstairs to the bed. Halfway up the stairs, the TV turned on full blast. I ran down the stairs and no one was in the living room. It scared me shitless. I turned off the TV and, afraid of my parents scolding me, I flew up the stairs and jumped in my bed. A little background. I worked summers as a camp counselor in the northern parts of Ontario, Canada. On the date this particular incident occurred, I was camping with a group of 10-year-old boys on the same lake the summer camp is based on. So like a routine camping trip, we canoe out to the site and set up our tents. Me and my co-counselor, Mike, take turns supervising the kids while they swim, build forts, and play games, etc. We cook some food over the fire, sit around and tell stories, cook s'mores, the typical Canadian camping experience. Around 9:30ish, I tell the kids it's time for bed, and they head into their tents. We were positioned a small walk away from the shoreline, but still in the line of the fire pit. So the kids had gone to bed, and me and Mike are shooting shit by the water, smoking a cigarette. Just basically hanging out before we decided to head into our tents and call it a night. What happened next still troubles me to this day and remains my go-to campfire story. We were both gazing into the pitch-black night water when a small light approaches us slowly and slightly above water level. We speculate what it could possibly be for a few minutes before it comes close enough for us to see that it is mounted on the front of a kayak and somebody was approaching our campsite. Now, it is important to note that as a camp counselor, part of our training goes over how to deal with stranger encounters in an environment where we are responsible for a group of children on public property. I was prepared to give the mysterious paddler the typical speech about how we are camping with a group from a recognized organization, and we were respectfully asked that they find another campsite. However, this person's appearance shook me to the bone as the light drew nearer. Paddling this kayak was a woman who looked to be in her 60s. She had incredibly long wisps of gray hair that were trailing behind in the water. Her skin looked like old leather, and her dead-looking eyes were tough to spot under all the wrinkles. She looked directly at me, and when she spoke, I realized she was missing most of her teeth. "Are all your children safe in bed?" she asked me, pointing in the direction of the tents. Not really knowing how to respond and quite frankly shitting myself, I responded by telling her that they were fine and she had to leave. "That's good, just as expected for this time," she said with a smile. She turned her kayak and paddled off into the night. At this point in time, myself and Mike were legitimately very creeped out, not only by the appearance of this mysterious woman who resembled a freaking corpse, but also her inquiry on the whereabouts and safety of our kids we had brought on this trip. Not knowing what else to do, we grabbed our hunting knives and sat by the fire checking on the kids. Half an hour later is where the shit started to get really creepy. Across the lake, a female counselor was leading another trip, the same age group. She sent me a text which read something along the lines of, "Hey Sean, stop screwing around with us. This isn't funny. My kids are really creeped out." I instantly called her and let her know I had just seen somebody near my campsite that seemed eerie, and that I was not trying to play a joke. Apparently one of their kids had opened their tents to take a piss and seen a woman with long hair standing with her arms open towards them from near the shoreline. I was an 18-year-old high school senior and was 3/4 away for the year. I had moved that year and switched to a school about 30 minutes from where I used to go. I stayed in touch with a few people from my old school and got invited to go camping with a few of them over Memorial Weekend. This basically meant getting drunk as fuck in the forest. I invited 2 girls and 1 guy from my new school to come hang out for a night, and met them in the closest town from the campsite about 40 minutes away. The guy Jeremy hopped in my car and the 2 girls followed me up, and we got to the campsite without incident. This campsite was 30 minutes away from any human signs of life, outside a shitty dirt road. The night started off fine with everyone getting completely trashed and me beating one of the girls I brought along named Sarah at beer pong, and she was very drunk and all over me. I guess to the 18-year-old version of me, that night couldn't have been going better at that point. At about 12:30, things started to die down as half of us have already puked and were heading in for the night, and I was much too drunk to even try to fuck Sarah. A lot of the night is still a blur, but I remember climbing into a tent, and there were 5 of us in it, 3 guys and 2 girls. At around 2:30 in the morning, I was awoken by the sound of a shotgun. I was still very drunk and had a hard time processing anything, but in my drunken state, I figured it was one of the people I was camping with being a dick. One of the guys, Brent, had stayed sober the entire night and had brought a shotgun up with him, so I figured it was him being a prick to everyone who was drunk. I checked my phone and went back to sleep. I fell asleep, and at what I think was around 3 in the morning, I'm awoken by somebody bawling their eyes out, and I am still having a very hard time processing anything. After about 5 minutes, I realized it's Brent, and I stumbled out of my tent, followed by Jeremy. And I walked out to see Brent is bleeding profusely from his nose and mouth, and I run over to him, stumbling the entire time. I am then hit in the head with a rock and knocked unconscious. Everything from this point forward is from Jeremy's point of view. Jeremy to this day is my best friend and has told his version of the story many times. He says I passed by a tree and a large man lunges out and smashes my face with a rock. After hitting me, the man lunges at Jeremy and tackles him straight on his ass. Jeremy at the time was 5'8", 140 pounds, and he described the man at least 6'4" and 280 pounds. Jeremy is being choked to death by this wooden monster of a man, and he hears another gunshot from a pistol. Sarah had managed to find a pistol Brent had also brought and fired a shot, missing the man by a large amount, but it managed to startle him, and he sprints off into the woods. They just let him go, and Jeremy drove me and Brent to the hospital. I had 3 broken teeth and a severe concussion, and Brent had part of his tongue mutilated with a knife and a broken nose. Brent has never talked to me or any of my friends from the trip about what exactly happened when he was alone with the man, and he refused to give the police much of a description. The man was never caught, and I have never been deep in the forest again. I moved to my dad's when I was 10 and didn't know anyone in the area except for the family my dad was friends with, a single mom with 3 kids. Luckily there was a girl a couple years older than me, 12 at the time I met her, and we got to know each other a little over a couple years. We weren't close, but ended up having the same friends. One night my friend Ra was hanging out with her and her younger brother. They happened to be alone in the house because my friend's mom was at work, which is where this gets terrifying and sad. Her mother has been helping this one lady through her work and got to know her fairly well. She found out her sister was in a mental institution and was let out recently. The night Rob is hanging out with my friend, they get a knock on the door. My friend thought it was just her mom, since she knocks a certain way before coming in, and she answered it without even thinking. Rob wasn't supposed to be there, and he took off through the window to his house down the road. He never thought twice about it. It wasn't her mom. It was the sister of the lady who her mom was helping, and she figured out through talking to her sister where her family lived and her mom's work schedule. She came in, and this is where I don't know the details, and I'm glad I don't. My friend's younger brother got away to the neighbors to call the police. The lady brutally murdered my friend a week from Christmas, decapitated her and left her body naked in a bathtub. She even hit her head. They had to look through the presents, and I don't know where they found it, but they did. I wasn't allowed to go to her funeral. It was the middle of the summer, and my parents left for the weekend to go to our house in Cape Cod. It's about a 2-hour drive away, so it's no big deal for them to leave me alone for a few days. My mom had made some pulled pork and pasta for me to heat up to eat whenever, and I had some money if I wanted to order a pizza. Things were all good. The first night I was alone, I stayed up till 3 in the morning playing Xbox, so I woke up really late the next day. I checked my phone when I woke up and saw it was a little past 1. I had made plans to play some hockey with my friends at 3, so I threw myself out of bed and stumbled into the shower. I take really long showers, so when my parents are gone, I go mental. I was in there for about 45 minutes when I heard the front door open. The bathroom is directly upstairs from the back door, and the thing is pretty loud when it opens. I immediately froze, since obviously I was supposed to be alone. I waited for about 2 minutes, ears trained and trying to hear anything, but I heard nothing. I figured it was just the wind or maybe my parents were home early, so I turned off the shower, wrapped my towel around myself, and slowly walked down the stairs to check it out. So the stairs to the kitchen, where the back door is, are pretty tight and walled in, so it's essentially like walking down a tighter version of this, but replacing the rail with a wall, so I can't see into the kitchen when I walk down. Even though my house is old as shit and each step on the stairs makes a super loud creak, I still took my time and tried to be as quiet as possible. I probably took 45 seconds walking down all 12 of the stairs, So when I get to the second to last stair, right before I could see around the corner into the kitchen, I take a little breath to compose myself. In my mind, I knew I was being stupid. There obviously wasn't anything in the kitchen. There's no way I wouldn't have heard another noise, and there's no reason for them to still be in the kitchen, even if there was burglars or something in the house. After sort of mentally chastising myself for being a wuss, I sort of chuckled to myself for being stupid, and just normally walked down the last 2 stairs and turned the corner into the kitchen. Standing about 2 feet away from me, in the middle of the kitchen, is a man staring straight at me, perfectly still, with a massive smile across his face, just staring at me. The thing I remember most vividly wasn't the face, or his smile, but his arms. They weren't just at his side. He held them in the strangest, most abnormal position I've ever seen. They were where one person would normally have their arms, but he had rotated them to the point where they were almost completely reversed, as well as lifted them up a little behind himself. I don't know why I remember this so much, but it's just the most demonic, abnormal position I've ever seen. Honest to God, I think I almost had a heart attack right there. Looking back, I can realize how fucking creepy the situation was, but in the moment I just took a step towards the guy and punched him as hard as I could in the jaw, sort of half slapping / pushing him to the ground. The second I connected, I beelined up the stairs, dropped the towel in the kitchen with my heart beating out of control. I fucking sprinted into my room and locked the door behind me and quickly put a chair up against the doorknob like you see on TV. Almost without thinking, I immediately called 911 and nearly in tears told the operator what happened. As I sat on my floor in practically the fetal position, staring at the door, praying that the cop would be there soon, I noticed the light coming from the gap between my door had stopped. The fucker was standing outside my door. There's no words to describe the feeling I had. I was almost paralyzed with fear, watching the shadow across the bottom of the door shift in tiny ways. I stayed balled up, staring at the gap, praying the man would just go away for what seemed like an hour, while the 911 operator was asking, "Hello, sir? Are you there? Hello?" I didn't want to make a noise, and even if I wanted to move my arms to bring the phone up to my mouth, I don't think I could have. Eventually the light returned to the gap and I heard the faintest of footsteps slowly creaking the wooden floorboards as he walked down the hall. It was silent for minutes as I just sat there curled up, unable to speak. I heard banging on the door and the sound of 2 officers entering my house. I finally felt safe and I opened the door to 2 of them standing there. Then I almost cried. Nowadays my parents don't even leave me home alone anymore. Thank God. And I check every lock on the door before going to bed. I still have nightmares occasionally and my heart starts racing whenever I see someone standing still. But I'm doing alright. Even working with sketch artists in a few lineups, the police never found whoever the fuck was in my house. That sends shivers down my spine every time I look outside, half expecting to see him standing across the street smiling under a lamppost. I have no idea what he wanted or who he was, but regardless, let's not meet again. I live in a pretty safe neighborhood, and usually would lock my doors. Last night I apparently didn't. It was not too long after I had taken my dogs out for the last time, and was turning off the TV and lights, when one of my dogs started growling. Not too weird since he sometimes does that when somebody walks by the house. I then heard the front door open and somebody walked in. My dog started barking. The other dog, who loves all people, came running from the other end of the room to greet our guest. At the same time, I was reacting to what was happening and went, "What the fuck? Who are you?" Standing in the hall was a guy in his mid to late 20s. He was skinny and tall. Oh wait, I don't think I'm in the right place. He generally seemed confused. I replied with, "Hell no you're not. Please get out." He apologized and said he was coming to hang out with a friend and just accidentally went into the wrong place. I asked him what house he was looking for, and he said a number that was just a few couple numbers off from mine. He apologized again and left. He seemed nice and non-threatening, but I was kinda spooked. This morning I was ready to laugh it off. I was planning on telling my neighbor, a couple in their 30s, what happened. I don't know them all too well, but we have talked before. Luckily I caught one of them when I was taking my dogs out. I didn't want to come off like I was mad or scared over what had happened, so I casually said, "I'm sure he told you about it, but your friend paid his surprise visit to me last night." My neighbor gave this confused look and said, "What are you talking about?" "Your friend, he walked into my house last night thinking it was your place." My neighbor was quiet for a second and then said, "I don't want to alarm you, but I have no idea what you're talking about. We didn't have a friend over last night." Last night, my roommate and I made a last-minute decision to go night swimming at the river in our city. It was around 8 p.m., so there were still a few people hanging out in the area, but it was quite dark. About 15 minutes after we got there, I saw a man shining his flashlight, seemingly looking for something near where we had put our stuff. I said, "Hey, keep an eye on that guy," to my roommate semi-loud, and he obviously heard us and scurried away. I began to feel anxious, but I waited a little bit to say something to my roommate. Eventually I did, and we decided to leave. We packed our stuff up and began to walk up the staircase that led to the parking lot, using our flashlights to see the steps. When out of the corner of my eye, I see a dark shadow dodge into some bushes at the top. I stopped and grabbed my roommate's arm and said, nope, and started walking back down the stairs. I told my roommate what I saw. When we got to the bottom of the stairs, and she said it was probably just a tree blowing in the wind, I started getting the strangest feeling in my stomach that I've never had before, and I just knew that if we went up the stairs, something bad was going to happen. I stood at the bottom and began to shine my light up to the top, trying to see if I could see anyone. And sure enough, I saw the outline of a man for a split second. As soon as the light hit him, he ducked behind the bushes again. Obviously, I went into a full-blown panic mode and started looking for the other people that were there, hoping somebody could walk us to our car. Luckily, we found a couple not far from the steps, and they walked us to our car, but seemed quite annoyed about it. When we got to the top of the steps, he was nowhere to be seen. A few hours after we got home, I got a notification on my neighbor's app, the Ring doorbell app that sends crime alerts for your area, that someone had been stabbed only a few streets away from where we were. I'm 100% certain this guy's intentions were bad. I don't know if he was planning on kidnapping us or robbing us, but I just know something really bad would have happened if I hadn't been paying attention and we walked up those stairs. Not sure if he was the person that stabbed someone, but that notification just scared me even more. I still feel sick in my stomach because of all this. I am young. I mean, I'm 30, so I'm kind of young. But I see this little girl at Walmart not too long ago, running around in the toy aisles. She must have ran past me 4 or 5 times, and every time she did, a man would always be right behind her on her tail. For some reason, I could feel something was off. I stopped the little girl and asked her if she was lost, and she said yes. I said, "This man isn't your daddy." And with almost tears in her eyes, she looked at him and slowly looked back at me and said, "No." I grabbed her by the hand and told her we were going up to the front to have them call for her mom. As the man was in our aisle, I gripped the little girl harder. When we walked past him and went up to the front of the store, walking right past was the man looking him straight in the eye, and he just gave me this side smirk that to this day makes the hair raise on my entire body. Had I not stopped that little girl and brought her up to the front to find her mom, I'm generally scared to know what would have happened to her. During the midsummer, usually around the middle of July, me and a couple of my good friends, Kevin, Ryan, and Tommy, all the way through my childhood, always made time to go up to my friend's family cabin, way up in the north, in the forest of Minnesota. His cabin's located on Vermilion Lake. Throughout all of our young years, we would always go, for sure accompanied by my friend's dad, Kevin's dad, who owns the cabin, and sometimes a few of our dads as well. Once we were juniors in high school, we felt mature enough and old enough to go to the cabin on our own. Finally, without Kevin's dad or any adult supervision that may have accompanied us. I would like to mention a little information in regards to my friend's cabin to help you picture the scenario. My friend's cabin is very remote and very based upon a very large-sized island. Other cabins were on the island, but the next one closest to us was a solid quarter or half a mile away at least, which is my best guess, which you could get to by taking a man-made path around the island. And I want to mention that to get to my friend's cabin, you had to park on a gravel road on the opposite side of the island, as his cabin is on an island, and to take his boat across the lake about a half a mile to reach the cabin. My mind always had the tendency to run around when sleeping there at night throughout all my years, for it was one level with only 2 bathrooms next to each other. Kitchen, a living room connected, and a bathroom in the back of the cabin. And when you slept in the cabin, there was always at least one window in each room with no curtains at all. So it was very easy to see outside to the woods and lake. And this is where my mind would run, so I always thought someone was peering in. Of course, nobody ever was. I had been to this cabin a dozen times throughout my lifespan, and nothing had ever happened. And the older I got, the easier I got to sleep. Now for the event. We usually would stay a week's worth, or 4 or 5 nights. On the 3rd night during the trip, when we were on our own finally, we had set up a campfire and had been drinking beers all night. I don't condone underage drinking, by the way. We just happened to sneak some, being the rebels we are. We went out to his dock to gaze up at the magnificence of the stars and enjoy the buzz, when all of a sudden we heard something out in the water. Sounded like a fish jumping out to catch a bug. We quickly looked out at the lake with curiosity, wondering where the splash came from. Thankfully the moon was out that night, which helped lit up the lake, otherwise it would be dark as black, with there being no city lights for miles upon miles, and we would have not been able to see anything on the lake. My one friend, Ryan, began to point out, saying, what the hell is that? After looking closely and finally spotting what he was pointing at, all I could describe it as, it simply looked like a head out in the middle of the lake, just floating about, staring at us directly. It was about 3/4 worth of a football field length away, out in the lake from the dock. There was no question that I could see its features. It had long black hair and very palish skin like a face, but couldn't see its mouth or eyes, nose or chin, as it just looked like a blob of pale skin with black hair over it. I'll never forget the feeling that came over me. The hairs on my legs, neck, arms all stood up, and I was paralyzed on the outside, ready to leave at that moment. But we told ourselves it was just a loon, as the birds are very popular night drifters on the lake, and do their hunting late at night, and also have black and white colors on their coats, and hunt by diving deep in the water, holding their breath up to minutes sometimes. So it was possible that a loon all of a sudden just popped up in the water after hunting a bit, or at least we tried to talk ourselves into that. All of us having the creeps, and noticing it wasn't moving one bit, just treading in the water, in the same place. We went back to our campfire, lit it even bigger, and headed inside to drink more. We soon forgot about the head with the help of some beers until I had to use the bathroom really bad, and the one inside was preoccupied. I just went outside to do my business, since we were in the great outdoors. When I had been taking a pee and glancing out at the beautiful moonlit lake, I noticed that the black circle object was still there, about 30 yards closer now, still looking as if it was staring right at me. I could easily see the nose on the thing. Again, it was very pale, like it hadn't seen the sun in years.
A very uneasy feeling came over me, and I immediately went inside and told my other friends to come out and look quickly, keeping my eyes glued to it at the door of the cabin. We came outside to see that it was still looking at us, as if its head was cocked up at us, with its chin in the air. Nobody dared go out to the dock anymore, and we immediately went back inside, ruling out that it probably wasn't a loon, because a loon wouldn't have treaded the water in the same spot. Eventually the current would have drifted it somewhere else in a rocking manner. For a loon to stay in the same spot for at least almost an hour, or maybe 2, made no sense to any of us. This head-like object was stiff as a board, and not moving a single muscle, just staring at us. There was no ripple effect to it at all from the lake. We said it was just a log and went back in. I could tell everyone felt uneasy too. A few hours would pass. It was super late into the night at this point, and I knew we needed to sleep. Because my curious self, I looked back outside once more, and the black object had completely vanished. I could help but feel a sense of relief thinking that the log might have floated off, or just shored somewhere. As we sat with the windows open that night, there was no AC in this cabin, and we had to open them or we would fry in the cabin in the middle of the summer. Me and my buddy Tommy slept in the room while the other 2 slept in the 2 separate rooms, with the doors open. Not being able to sleep but keeping my eyes peeled shut, I began to hear someone walking around at the bottom of the stairs to the cabin. I thought I was about to shake bricks. No question what or whoever I heard down there was on the dock now, pacing back and forth as it made the sound of boot clicking on the wood. It was as if they weren't sure what to do with themselves. It lasted for about 3 minutes. Wanting to whisper to my buddy, but frozen in fear, I just kept my eyes shut and ears on full alert. The footsteps sounded like they took 2 rapid steps up the stairs all of a sudden, but then turned around and sounded like they sprinted down the man-made path. After it sounded like the steps were long gone, and a couple of minutes had passed, I woke up Tommy, asking him if he heard the steps. Both of us sitting up, I was startled to see my friend Ryan walking out of his room and saying, "We need to leave," a moment after the steps had vanished. He must have heard us talking, so he felt like he could come out as well, but either way he was waking us up regardless. Something was very disturbing about his expression, and I asked why. He woke up my other friend Kevin in the other room and said, "Let's go to the boat, it's time to go." Asking him, What? Ryan, what the hell is wrong with you?" He explained to us quickly while grabbing his stuff, and I will never forget what he explained, as won't my other friends. He said when he was turning on his side on his bed to get more comfortable, he saw someone peeking in the top right corner of his window, and it quickly shifted out of view. He said all he saw was one eye, ghostly white skin, and black hair long down the window. Again, another thing I would like to add. When we look back on his experience, it chills us to the bone, realizing that since the face was in the top right corner of the window of my friend's room that he was sleeping in, this thing either was damn near 8 feet tall, standing on something like bricks trying to peek in, or was floating. Ryan then continued to say, "Let's fucking go," very seriously, absolutely disturbed the fuck out of our mind and feeling like I was going to be sick. I then told them what my friend and I had heard in the living room, and we all agreed and packed up our stuff and booked it, not cleaning the cabin like we usually do before leaving. We locked up, and as we were heading downstairs, we saw bare footprints in the dirt heading off into the path and all around the cabin. We picked up our step getting into the boat, not knowing what was watching us or around us. Threw our stuff on the boat, untied it, and sped off. I didn't even think about the head in the water anymore, or to look in the water, thank God. My eyes were just glued on the island trying to spot anything moving, but I saw nothing. When we had finally gotten our stuff packed in the car, and the boat tied up, we hopped in the car and took off. We had been driving about 10 miles, and out of the blue, Ryan, who said he saw the person outside his window, all of a sudden broke down in the car sobbing, saying, "What was it, guys? Oh fuck, what did I see?" We called to tell our parents what had happened on the way back, and Ryan was freaked out, and they just told us to come home safely and quickly. It was late, about 4 or 5 in the morning, but no one slept, and it was a very quiet ride home. My friend's dad, who owns the cabin, went up that following weekend and said he experienced nothing while there, but did mention bare footprints were still lingering about, which he thought was odd because someone was walking around his property, which bugged him badly. Whatever my one friend saw in the window really hit him hard. After his breakdown, he had trouble sleeping multiple nights and ended up seeking help for a couple of weeks and hopped on some sleeping medication. As time went on, he ended up being fine, but he's uncomfortable sleeping next to a window without a curtain. I to this day cannot explain what happened and why it seemed to happen to us. I cannot explain what I saw on the lake and what Ryan specifically saw. Nothing has ever happened at that cabin since that night, so we're told by my friend's dad who owns it, which I believe him. I personally decided to never go back to the cabin, which really makes me sad because I had great childhood memories there. Tommy and Kevin both have gone back and been fine, but Ryan refuses to go back, and I'm with him. A lot of people have cabins on the island, so it could have been a prank in the making that got busted when Ryan saw the person in the window. Or the person probably wanted to do something worse. I would never be able to explain what was floating in the lake, but the fact that the incident, along with bare footprints and someone looking in Ryan's window at night, all happened in the same night, seems more than a coincidence.
About 5 years ago, I was living at home with my parents and my twin brother was there too. Every morning at about 7 a.m., we would both run. We had mapped out this giant loop that we would run. To make a bit of competition, I would run in one direction and my twin would run in the other direction. That way we could stay focused. Part of this run was on a main street of the city that my parents lived in. On this main road, there were some shady apartments, kind of hidden by a bunch of trees. The direction I was running, the view of these apartments was obscured by a giant hedge, and I couldn't see the apartments until I was right in front of them. Out of my peripherals, I see a woman standing amongst the trees staring at me. I immediately got chills and did not turn to face her, because I didn't want to be rude. So I run on and forget about it a few minutes later. I pass my twin about 10 minutes later. He's going in the opposite direction as I. I get home and my twin isn't back yet, so I just go about the rest of my morning routine, including taking a shower. I get out of the shower, my twin still hasn't come back yet, and I start to get a bit worried. An hour after I had gotten home, he still isn't back and I call him. He tells me he's on his way back, and he has something he needs to tell me and my parents. He finally gets back and tells us that he was running in front of these apartments. He saw a woman hanging from the trees in front of the apartments. As soon as it's obvious that he's seen her, a man comes out sprinting from the apartments, wailing and screaming, "No, I can't believe she did this." And he grabs her body and lays her on the ground and starts performing CPR. It's obvious it's her husband. My brother calls the local police, and they dispatch an ambulance and police officers. My brother has to stay for questioning and a witness report and all that jazz. He is obviously troubled by it since he was going the opposite way I was running. He didn't have a hedge obscuring his view and got a straight view of this woman hanging there. It's still hard for me to believe that the woman I saw staring at me out of my peripherals was dead the entire time. I do find it very sketchy that the husband came running out as soon as it was obvious someone had discovered her body. That is a bit too convenient if you ask me, but I don't want to say this man killed his wife without any evidence. My brother has never followed up with the police, leading me to believe that the death was ruled as a suicide. I just still can't fathom that if I would have turned to face this woman, I would have discovered her about 20 minutes earlier than my twin. It deeply troubles me that I didn't.
I was about 7 years old, my brother about 10. It was well past our bedtime when our mom woke us up off the couch to put us to bed. Our dad worked construction out of town back then, so it was often just the three of us at the house for weeks at a time. Up the stairs and to the immediate right was our parents' bedroom. Going left put you in the middle of a hallway. Taking another left down that hallway led to my brother's room. The opposite end was my room, which was also across the hall from our upstairs bathroom. At either end of the hallway are window doors we always kept locked and rarely used. The door on my end led to a balcony overlooking our front yard, and the door on my brother's end opened to our back porch. The house kinda leans into a small hill. My brother and mom had a habit of waking up in the middle of the night to use the bathroom. I only knew this because I was always a light sleeper, and they just couldn't help flushing with the door wide open. This night, however, my brother stopped on his way to his room and came back towards the bathroom. I'm gonna try to pee before I go to bed. The past few nights I've been too afraid to walk to the bathroom. I keep seeing a man wearing stripes at the end of the hallway. I don't know if my mom wrote it off as my brother telling ghost stories to try to scare me, or if she was already half asleep and didn't catch it, but she didn't recall at all to my brother's confession. I, on the other hand, was terrified by it. The fear of seeing a ghost like that at the end of the hallway or through the windows is the reason I stopped running from the stairs to my bedroom at night. Years later, when I was 18, my mom and I were having a conversation in her car about a dog we had for a very short time when I was little. We were sharing stories about Max's tendency towards destroying my shoes and other unruly behaviours when my mom blurted out, "Do you remember that time I opened the front door for the cops and Max ran inside to the kitchen and started tearing open that big bag of dog food we had?" This really caught me by surprise because in all the years I've lived in that house we never once called the cops. Gun owner family in a quiet rural WV neighbourhood, etc. I asked her what she was talking about and she looked eagerly surprised as if she had just revealed something by accident. "Oh, that's right, I never told you because you were too young at the time. One night I woke up hearing noises outside my window and when I looked I saw a man staring into my bedroom." She went on to describe how turning on the lights caused him to take off running and how she grabbed my dad's pistol before calling the cops. I can't remember all the details I gave when they showed up. Tall white male wearing a striped shirt and jeans, short dark hair, something like that. They said it matched the description of a man they were looking for in that area. It turns out he had escaped from jail on a murder charge. Now I know it sounds so obvious hearing these two stories back to back, but it wasn't until a few years ago, in my mid-20s, I pieced it together that my brother had unknowingly warned us about a murderer who spent multiple nights casting our home.
A few years ago, I was driving from Texas to Louisiana to help my dad move. When I stopped at this tiny crappy motel right off the highway, it was very late at night and it was the only option I could think of. I don't remember the person who checked me in at all. I was so drowsy I could barely keep my eyes open. All I remember was sitting on the bed, kicking off my shoes, and noticing that the room I was staying in was connected to another room. I saw the door was in the locked position, and I fell backwards and passed out. At some point in the night, I laid on my side. I don't remember when or how long I'd been sleeping, when I was awoken in the most terrifying way possible. A sharp object was stabbed into my back. I screamed and fell off the bed. I looked and barely got a glimpse of what looked like a very skinny man with long hair run through the room that was connected to my room. I was taken to the hospital after I ran into the parking lot screaming, and the paramedic removed a letter opener from my back. I never returned to the motel, and I have no idea who was in my room or why they stabbed me.
I've told this story in other places, on other accounts before, but it bears repeating. One day when I was an elementary schooler, I think probably 3rd or 4th grade, I was awoken by my mom in a rush. She had overslept, and since she always woke me up in the morning, this meant that I too overslept. And now there was just no way that I was going to be ready for school early enough to get on the school bus. School started at 8 a.m. and my bus pickup time was 7 a.m, but it was already like 6:40 or something, and I was still in my pajamas and hadn't even had breakfast yet. So Mom decided that today we would just tell the bus driver to go on ahead and she would take me to school, which would give us plenty of time to get ready. So I'm sitting there at the dinner table, eating breakfast, still in my pajamas, and it's about 6:50. We hear the bus pull up about 10 minutes earlier than usual. My mom peeks her head out of the door into the foggy morning, waves the bus on. She closes the door and comes back inside, but the bus still doesn't pull away. There's a knock at the door and my mom opens it to find a man in a bus driver uniform. He explains that he's a substitute driver because the regular driver called in sick. He says he knows he's a few minutes early since he wanted to get an early start on the routine since he didn't know it well. Mom explains to him that she was going to take me to school since we woke up late. He gets verbally upset and says that he can wait a few minutes since he's already running ahead of schedule. My mom insists that no, I won't be ready to go in a few minutes and tells him to go on ahead. He seems angry about this but turns around and got back into the bus and left. I returned to eating my breakfast and still don't have my school clothes on at this point. But at 7 a.m. sharp, another bus pulls up to my house. Mom thinks this is weird and goes outside to talk to them. She comes back inside looking terrified but doesn't really say anything about it and tells me to finish getting ready for school. At the time I didn't know what happened, but Mom would end up telling me a few years later. When she went to the second bus, she found out that it was being driven by my regular bus driver and was full of all the other kids that are usually on the route. The other bus was empty, by the way. Mom asked the driver about the substitute driver and about him calling in sick. I never called in sick. There is no substitute driver on my route, he says. The driver immediately calls a dispatch in a panic and told my mom to go inside and call the police, which she did without me knowing, and report this accident. There was absolutely no one doing my driver's route that day. Whoever this was most likely a kidnapper who had targeted me. I never heard anything about it again. Not even if someone else had ended up being picked up by this mysterious fake bus driver. But chances are, had I gotten on that bus, I would have never made it to school or back home. And if Mom hadn't overslept on that specific day, I would have been on that bus.
When I was a teenager, I was goth. Black hair, black clothes, black makeup, even had a pair of combat boots. My friends and I, in typical goth fashion, hung out at a local cemetery. We started going there as a joke, but soon discovered we liked the peace we found there. That all changed one night. My friend called to see if I wanted to hang out, and I did. None of the other friends were available. They were either working or recovering from partying the night before, so we were on our own. My friend picked me up and we drove up to the cemetery. We were hanging out, smoking cigs and BSing about the latest issue she was having with her boyfriend. But we noticed at the top of the hill, about 100 feet away, a bonfire had been lit. You had to understand that this cemetery is about a block off campus of a major university, and it's not uncommon for college students to go there and party. My friend and I sighed, knowing we would have to get going soon. It was illegal to be in the cemetery after dark, and we knew the police would show up because some jerks had decided they needed a bonfire. We decided to finish our cigs and then take off. Just then, the most horrible stench came wafting down the hill from the direction of the bonfire. My friend gagged and covered her mouth. I groaned and said, "What the hell?" My friend shook her head, saying, "I don't know what they're doing. Let's just leave." We get in the car and one of us suggested, I honestly don't remember who, maybe we should just go up there and see what they're doing. My stomach churned, and a cold shiver went through my body. My friend must have had the same feeling, because at the same time we both said, "No, we should leave." My friend turned the car on, switched on her headlights, put the car in reverse, and looked over her shoulder before starting to back up. I was still looking up at the hill. A figure stepped in front of the bonfire. I could only see a silhouette, but I was sure whoever it was watching us. A feeling of terror hit me and I said, "Go, go, go," getting louder and more panicked with each word. My friend looked back up at the hill for a second, and just as the figure stepped towards us, she slammed on the gas and peeled out of there, going in reverse down the hill. She rammed the gear shift into drive and we went out. We didn't say anything for a while until she said, "What the hell were they burning?" I shook my head. I don't know. She dropped me off at home and went to bed. The next morning I woke up and went out to the kitchen. My mom was there, drinking her morning coffee, and I joined her. We talked about her job for a bit, when suddenly she comes out with, "Did you hear what happened last night?" I shrugged and said no. I had just gotten up. She tells me that a woman she worked with was kidnapped from the parking garage. "Oh my God," I said. "Did they find her?" "Yes, but too late," she replies. "Whoever took her had raped her and murdered her. They found her body this morning up in the cemetery. He had tried to dispose of her body in a bonfire." I froze. My brain was going a mile a minute. The realization slowly creeped up. That's what that smell was. Needless to say, I never hung out in the cemetery at night again. I think back to our decision to leave instead of investigating the fire. That one decision could have changed everything. Dark silhouette in the bonfire. Let's not meet.
This is the story of 3 disturbing encounters with the same man. Let's not make it 4. When I was 15 years old at the time and out to a weekend afternoon movie with my friend, we were really early, so we decided to take a look around a nearby toy store to kill some time before the previews began. I was strolling absent-mindedly down an aisle by myself looking at toys I felt too old for when I heard an odd whistle. If you've ever heard the iPhone notification chime, then you have an idea of the sound I heard. I thought nothing of it. Maybe it was someone's phone and moved through the aisles. Eventually meeting back up with my friend, we moved around a bit talking and laughing. I heard that whistle once again. Being preoccupied with my conversation more than anything else, I still didn't pay it any mind. On our way out of the store, I heard the whistle for a third time, but much closer, practically right over my shoulder, and I whipped around mid-sentence. A man stood there, grinning from ear to ear in a strangely sinister way. The smile didn't fully reach his eyes. He was a bit on the small side, scraggly with long hair tied back in a low ponytail. He had on a tattered black t-shirt which hung loosely off his tiny frame, and a bulging black drawstring backpack. "Hi," he said, stretching his lips even wider around his contrasting bright white teeth. As a teenage girl, I was no stranger to the attention of older men, but something about his persona and approach set me on edge. Still, I was taught to be polite. "Hi," I responded talkatively, taking a step backwards and away from his intense stare. "I've noticed you around the store and I thought I could get your opinion on something." He unfurls a crumpled, stained copy of a toy store's weekly ad and politely stabs at the Barbie doll selection with his index finger. "See, I'm looking for a perfect doll for my niece and I just have no idea which one to pick. What do you think?" He looks up and smiles, but his eyes are dark pools of nothingness, devoid of any real attention. "This one is nice," he said, pointing to a doll at random, hardly looking at the ad. "Wow, thank you, I really appreciate that. Hey, has anyone ever told you how pretty you are? You must go to the gym often. What gym do you go to?" Taken aback by his abrupt stream of rehearsed sounding pickup lines, I say thank you and force a laugh. I'm young and so is my friend. Our inexperience and strange approach kept us frozen in place. His eyes bore only into mine, and his grin, wider still and deeply concerning, never fades from his face. "Hey, do you want to be friends? I'd like very much to be friends with you. You know what friends do, they take pictures together. Let's take a picture together since we're friends." He holds up a red flip phone, with the front cover held together by a rubber band. He activates the front-facing camera, and before I can say anything, he leans into me, face uncomfortably close, and snaps the picture. He looks at it briefly, smiles, and pockets his phone. "There now, we're friends," he says matter-of-factly and turns his gaze back to me appraisingly. Stupidly, in a horrified daze, I nod. "So where are you from? Where are you going after?" My friend puts her arm on my arm and I suddenly break from my stupor. "We have to go, my dad's waiting," I say, and we turn to go. My last but not final glimpse of him is with his head cocked to the side and that wide smile spread across his face. His eyes now flicker with something I can only recall as amusement. We turn our backs and as soon as we get far enough, we run. Fast forward to a year and a half later, I'm in my junior year of high school, and on the early morning city bus heading to my first class of the day, the bus is packed and I squeeze my way to the back, reaching out a hand to grab the pole as the bus brakes sharply. I hear a whistle close to my ear. When I hear it again, I adjust my earbuds in my ear. Why isn't that person answering the phone? A hand closes right above mine on the pole. It is too close and our fingers brush, but the person holds their hand there almost immediately. I move my hand and glance up and into the broad smile of the creepy man from the toy store. Cold chills shoot down my spine and I grip the pole even harder until my knuckles turn white. He tilts his head, still smiling his toothy grin, and says, "Hi friend." The bus is so jam-packed that there's nowhere else for me to go, so I turn my body as far away from him as possible, hoping that playing dumb would work in my favor and that he would go away. He leans closer still and says, "Hi, do you remember me?" I shake my head no and lean as far away as I can in the tight space. He frowns and looks suddenly angry. "No, I know you. We met before. We're friends." I shake my head again, looking down, pretending to be engrossed in my music player. Maybe if he didn't get a full look at my face, he might think he had me confused with someone else. "No, I have your picture," he says and reaches into his drawstring bag, pulling out his red flip phone, held together by frayed rubber bands. All the while I'm thinking if he sees me get off at the stop to my school, he'll know where I am every day and could find me easily, but if I get off at a random shop before my school, he could get off with me and I have nowhere else to go. He's still scrolling through his phone and I'm imagining all the other girls' pictures he might have on there when he asks, "So what school do you go to?" I think about saying, "Mind your own business," but then remember his angry frown from before and give him the name of another school. It doesn't really make sense because this bus only goes past one high school and not the one I told him. But he nods at this and says, "Hold on, I have your picture somewhere. We're friends." The bus pulls up to my high school and there's nothing else I can do but to get off. While he's still preoccupied with his phone, I lose myself in the crowd and run all the way to school. I'm shivering when I get to my first period classroom and I can hear blood rushing in my ears. I asked my boyfriend to take the bus with me every morning for the next few weeks, and I change up my route going to and from, but I don't see him again until 2 years later and I am a sophomore in college. I am taking the bus home alone after a late night out with my friends when I hear a weird whistle. Enough time has passed that I don't feel much alarm and exit the bus at my stop. It is completely dark out and I am one of the two people who get off. Then from behind me I hear, "Hello there. Do you remember me?" I turn around and it's him again. It's hard to make out his features in the dark, but I instantly remember the tone of his voice, recall the whistle, the tilted head, and the wide toothy smile. I see what looks like a backpack strapped to the front of his chest. "No," I said, and start walking faster, heart racing, wondering how fast I can run in these flip-flops. I hear him picking up speed behind me and I dare to glance back. I glance him starting to run at me, his hands in his backpack, digging around for something I don't want to know. He is angry now, smile gone, and he shouts at me, "So you want to be that way?" I start running and don't stop until I get home. So to the whistling man with the backpack, "No, I do not want to be your friend. Let's not meet again."
This took place about 10 years ago when I was a freshman in college. This is the first time I'm recounting this story in full detail to anyone. I attended college in a rural mountain area in the Northeast, a small school tucked away in the rolling hills of the mountains, the type of place where the beauty and casual grace of nature was juxtaposed by the ugliness of humanity. The newspaper was ultra-conservative and you couldn't sojourn too deeply into the woods beyond a few trees without seeing some trace of meth activity. You know the place I mean. Anyway, one of my new friends from college discovered somehow an abandoned train trestle deep in the woods about 5 miles from campus, in no man's land basically. I don't remember how we found this place, because it was very much off the beaten path. The trestle crossed above a river which placidly flowed about 40 feet below. It was actually quite beautiful, and we began going there maybe 3 times a week, just chilling on the trestle, watching the water below and the open sky above. We drank 40s there, smoke a bowl there, bring girls there. We began jumping off the trestle into the water below, and then climb back up. It was just a very collegey thing to do. Our chill spot basically. So one day, just needing to get away from the dorms and away from it all, I decided to go by myself to the trestle for a swim. It was about 7 p.m. so I still had a good hour or so of dim sunlight, and I brought a flashlight for the walk home when it was sure to be dark. I made the trek through the pathways of the woods, as I had done 100 times before, left my Talon flashlight on the trestle, and jumped into the water. The water was about a 10 to 15 feet drop, I'd say. It flowed almost imperceptibly. You might as well be swimming in a stagnant pool. About maybe 50 yards away from the trestle, the river narrows and the current picks up significantly. Then about 20 yards after that, there is maybe a 20-foot high waterfall that bubbles and splashes with extreme violence. We used to watch the large objects go over and never come back up again. So there I am, dimly bobbing my head in and out of the water, doing underwater flips, etc. When I pop my head out of the water, I happen to glance to the side of the river and see a man walking towards the water. The water is kind of impeding my view, so I didn't see him fluently. I more see him at different stages of being closer to the water. Like flipping through a flip book. He's 15 feet away, 10 feet away, 5 feet away. I can barely give you a description. Maybe 6 feet tall, pale, skinny, black hair pulled back in a ponytail. What I do remember most about his appearance was the extremely empty look in his face and his eyes. Like he was doing something mundane, like taking out the trash or raking leaves. I'm treading water, not knowing what to think, and I see that he is no longer beside the river. He has dove in, and is swimming pinned straight directly at me, so fast. I try to swim the opposite way, but within a minute I feel him grab my ankle and tug. I tried to scream, but water filled my mouth. While I'm under the water, he lets go and goes up for air, then grabs back on and pulls me again. It seems like he's done this before, and I never once seen him jump in the water. He's gradually pulling me to where the current picks up before the waterfall. I start to realize this and just fucking flip out, kicking, screaming, cursing to no effect. Finally, I feel the current take me. As I twist away towards the waterfall, I look back and see this. The fucking guy just casually swimming back to where he jumped in the water, not even looking at me. This is by far the scariest moment of my life as I approach the waterfall. Long story short, I go over, and I'm underwater for a long time, over a minute. The water above unrelentingly pushing me under. The only reason I survived was there was a large log that I'd gone over, and I grabbed it and leveraged it against me to the bottom, pushing me away from the crushing water. I survived, obviously, but then I had to trek the miles back to the dorm in the dark without my flashlight, every step of the way thinking he would come back to finish the job. The next year, a football player drowned going over that waterfall. The news said it was because there was an extreme current due to recent rainfall, but I've always wondered about that. This actually happened to my best friend and I 6 years ago, and to this day it sends chills up my spine. In our early teen years, Will and I were more than a little adventurous. Both of our mothers were teachers at our school, and part of being a teacher's kid is that after the final bell rings on your last day, it's still not summer. You can look forward to one more week of waking up early so you can help your parent clean their classrooms and pack up textbooks. It's always boring, and most of the days our mothers were in meetings, so we just ran around an empty school. I remember vividly that it was a Friday, the last day before we could experience our summertime freedom, and Will's older sister Stephanie had also come to help pack her mom's classroom. The three of us had been playing manhunt while our moms were in meetings. Will told us that he wanted to smoke. We were 15, and Stephanie was 17, but they'd been smoking for a few years. I'm the daughter of a lifetime smoker, so I opted out. We walked to the adjacent middle school football field, then past an open fence and into wooded clearing that was a usual hangout for kids skipping class. I need to interject the story to tell you that I'm from Florida, and rural Florida is nothing like the postcards of tanned beauties and flamingo skyscrapers. My hometown exists only because someone developed a way to make semi-livable land out of a swamp. So Will, Stephanie, and I sat on the outskirts of this clearing as they smoked, until we decided it'd be fun to go for a walk in the woods. Will swore that there was a river that you could swim in. We walked for about 15 minutes, and that's when I realized we hadn't considered finding our way back. Most of rural Florida looks the same. Oak trees with Spanish moss, palmettos, and pine needles. None of us thought about leaving a trail. I took out my phone to call my mother, but there was no signal. I suggested that we go back, that we hadn't told anyone where we were, and it was getting to that mid-afternoon thunderstorm time. They agreed we should turn around, and we thought we had. It turns out Stephanie has no sense of direction, and she led us deeper into the forest. We were walking for about 30 minutes when we realized how lost we were. Nothing looked familiar, but everything did. The same flora and fauna we'd seen when we entered surrounded us, and I quickly formed a plan. Still to this day, I'm the only one who's worth a damn in an emergency. I thought if we could find another open space, we could signal for help or maybe get a signal. We walked for 30 more minutes before we saw a hunting tree stand, which was more than odd. By this point, I knew that we had crossed over into the national park behind our school.
and hunting was strictly forbidden. More walking, less talking. We were dehydrated, hungry, and bleeding from going straight through a field of palmettos. Will was the first one to see the cages, at least 20 of them. Huge metal cages, with hatches propped open by sticks. Stephanie suggested it was for catching wild boars, but none of us had ever seen or heard of boars around town. Some of the cages had dried blood around them, and one looked as though it had been kicked hard from the inside. The entire time we were lost, Will had been trying to call his dad. No signal, so no luck. My flip-flops broke, so I was now barefoot and bleeding pretty badly from the palmettos. We needed to take a break, and I sat on a log while Will went around, holding his Nokia Razr up in the air, trying to get a signal. He left our sight for maybe 10 minutes when I heard him scream. Stephanie and I sprinted towards the direction of the scream, but froze when we saw two men. One was about 60, with white blonde hair that hung down to his shoulders, and a weather-beaten face. He was covered in dirt, and the denim shirt he was wearing was shredded to bits. The other was about 20, and looked as though he had just left his job at a cubicle, a button-down white shirt and nice pants. Neither were wearing shoes, and they were both crouching. These two men were squatting and looking directly at us, their arms limp and dangling, close-lipped smiling. They stayed like that. It felt like an hour passed before my body's fight or flight kicked in, and I guess mine chose fight. I crouched too and stared them down. After what I'd guess was maybe 3 minutes, the older man stood up and ran into the woods, and the younger one followed. Will re-emerged from the woods not long after, hysterical. He was crying hard, and he had peed himself. He asked me repeatedly why we hadn't come when he screamed, and I tried to explain that we couldn't because of the two men. When he finally seemed to understand what I was saying, he stopped crying and went silent. We walked for another 20 minutes in dead silence when I saw pavement. We had finally run into civilization, a bike trail that runs through the national park to be exact. I had never been so excited to see asphalt. We called our parents, we sat on the ground, and we cried together. It had only been 4 hours, but it had felt like days. My mother bought me a huge jug of water and yelled at me for running into the woods, but she was so relieved I was okay. I told her about the two men, and she thought that warranted telling the cops, so I wrote my statement, and that was the end. I never heard anything from the cops. About 2 weeks later, Will was over at my house playing video games when he brought up the subject of the woods. Through bites of pizza, he told me that he hadn't even seen the two men. When he was searching for a signal, he heard pine needles being crunched underfoot, and it sounded as if something was bounding at him, so he hid. He didn't even look behind him, just hid behind a fallen tree. The noise stopped, and he stood up to come back to us when he saw a woman crouching about 15 feet from him. She had dried blood in her hair and all over her shirt. That's when Will screamed, and she stared at him until she turned and ran into the woods. To this day, I don't think anyone's ever found them, and I refuse to step foot into that park.
When I was younger, about 10 years ago, I got into bird watching. I was about 12, so it wasn't really official by any means. I was just some kid that liked to sneak up on birds, take pictures, and look them up in books. I decided to start this hobby by making a list with pictures I had printed out from the library of native birds in my region. Every weekend, I wander around the neighborhood, which was suburbs smashed haltily against large plots of land covered in bush, in search of new birds. With a few ponds and a large creek in the area, I found quite a few within a few weeks. However, there was one bird I had to set my sort of white whale due to its rarity in my area, the black vulture. Unfortunately, I cannot remember the exact date or what month it was, even if I believe sometime to be in the fall. However, but one weekend, I decided to spend the next 2 days searching high and low for the black vulture. I went climbing over the small wired fence around a nearby bushy area, as per usual, and searched. Usually I had the best luck finding scavenger birds on the roadkill beside the road, and there so happened to be a small 2-lane wider that mirrored the creek nearby, just through the foliage. so I cut across the sort of mini forest, heading to that direction. As much as it made me sad to see a dead deer or opossum, it was a common sight on this road. As both sides were open, with trees and undergrowth almost choking it, there are some parts of the road that almost become sort of a tunnel. Due to the leaves intertwining above, it was incredibly easy for a deer or some other animal to jump out in front of the car in the dark, with neither party realizing until it was too late. I didn't have much luck. There were a few crows on the smear of a squirrel, and I saw a few ducks swimming next to the creek beside me, but nothing big. It started getting late, but the sun was still up, and despite the dangers of walking down the forest road in the dark, I was determined to stay as long as possible. I decided to reach a small park area at the end of the road, and then I made my way back. I went under a small tunnel of leaves and came out on the other side, and was delighted to see a familiar shape of a large bird in the sky, circling. It was just the right shape and size to be a vulture, but I had hope of checking for the grayness of the feathers, as the sunlight was limited. Instead, I was stuck following it as it slowly began to lower. After about 10 minutes or so, it landed, and I carefully snuck forward, cautiously avoiding anything that could alert the bird from my presence. I snuck low to the ground, realizing that the bird had landed in a small clearing at the far end of the park. It was just a small and open field, slightly tilted down a hill, with a parking lot on the top. I had been there before, as it was a fun spot for kids to roll down the hill because of how steep it was. I approached it from the bottom, excitement brimming, when I heard several scracks and shrieks of another bird. Black vultures are more aggressive than turkeys, and I was hoping to catch a great spat. I got to the edge of the clearing and pulled out my binoculars. Two things that hit me all at once. One, I found it odd that they were in the middle of a park, rather than closer to the road, where you would seem to find the roadkill. Though, I reasoned, things could die anywhere, even in the middle of the park. However, secondly, it smelled awful. The scent was rather light, but I've been known to have a really sensitive nose, and just this sharp, coppery scent, like when you pull rotten ground out of a meat bag. I had smelled roadkill before, in the heat of the day. It smelled bad, but nothing like this. When I put my binoculars to my eyes, I expected a deer corpse and birds fighting. I never in a million years thought I would see a corpse of a completely different kind. The birds were there, and I remember the faint pang of excitement I still had, recognizing the proud head of a black vulture, before the image of it sitting on the chest of its naked woman sucked the life out of me. I was frozen, and I could not look away. My throat tightened with vomit, and I could not look away. The birds had done surprisingly little to her body. She had what I think were cuts, but most of her was intact. What wasn't, the bird's rat, her eyes, lips, and genitals were red and shredded. If there was a big, defining wound, I missed it. Between the gathering of birds and the fading light, but what I did see, I can never forget. I haven't forgotten. I can pull up the image so clearly now, even after all this time. She was so pale, almost blue in places, with blonde, crinkled hair. I sat there, surprisingly, for I don't know how long, as the sun sunk behind the trees. This was about the time cell phones were a common thing, and I had quite the hike back home. I realized now that I was in shock, and I could only move when the sudden fear of whoever did this could be nearby hit me. I forced myself to slowly waddle backwards into the trees, not taking my eyes off the body. I didn't want to turn around for some reason. I was so scared someone would be right behind me. I thought that if I back up forever, nothing would happen. It was dusk, and suddenly there was light. High beams from the top of the hill. A single pair. I heard the screech of tires as the wheels wheeled out, and listened to it veer off to the left and away down the road, opposite in the direction I was headed. That was the last straw, and I ran the entire way back the second I could hear, and I ran the entire way back the second I could no longer hear it. I crashed through at least a mile of brush, and while I was smart enough to have boots and thick jeans on, my arms were bare and bleeding by the time I stopped. I paused midway through the brush by my house, realizing that, embarrassingly, I pissed myself in fear at some point before crawling back my way through people's yards to get home, avoiding all passing cars. The horror didn't completely end there, as I was home until past midnight, as my mom worked late at a diner nearby. It was stupid, and I regret it to this day. It was stupid, and I regret it to this day. But no, I did not call the police instantly, nor my mom. I was stupidly afraid that if I did, my mom would get mad at me, and I would never be allowed to go outside again, or worse, that they wouldn't believe me for some reason. I locked all my doors, double-checked, took a shower, and locked myself in my room. I had fallen asleep somehow. By the time my mom came home, I confronted her in the morning. At least, but by that time, when we made that call together, the body had already been found. They took my statement. We never got any calls back. I stopped birdwatching. I tried my best to find an article or news somewhere about this, but I failed in finding anything. It probably doesn't help that I can't remember the exact date. I have had a lot of missing time of ages from 12 to 14 for some reason, which I can't even begin to explain. There are a few things though I remember so well, and this is a big one. I have never shared a story with anyone outside my own family, but I find that it might fit here, and I apologize if it's not. It was sort of therapeutic, I think, writing this out after so long. I'm going to keep finding a way to try to verify this, and I'll update it as soon as I can.
I was an 18-year-old high school senior and was about 3/4 of the way through the year. I had moved that year and switched to a school about 30 minutes away from where I used to go. I stayed in touch with a few people from my old school and got invited to go camping with a few of them over Memorial Weekend, which basically meant getting drunk as fuck in the forest. I invited 2 girls and 1 guy from my new school to come hang out for a night and met them in the closest town from the campsite about 40 minutes away. The guy, Jeremy, hopped in my car and the girls followed me up, and we got to the campsite without incident. This campsite was 30 minutes away from any human signs of life outside of a shitty dirt road. The night started off fine with everyone getting completely trashed and me beating one of the girls I brought named Sarah at beer pong, and she was very drunk and all over me. I guess to the 18-year-old version of me that night couldn't have been going better at that point. At about 12:30, things started to die down as half of us had already puked and were heading in for the night, and I was much too drunk to even try and fuck Sarah. A lot of the night is still a blur, but I remember climbing into a tent and there were 5 of us in it, 3 guys and 2 girls. At around 2:30 a.m. I was awoken by the sound of a shotgun. I was still very drunk and had a hard time processing anything, but in my drunken state I figured it was one of the people I was camping with being a dick. One of the guys, Brent, had stayed sober the entire night and had brought his shotgun up with him, so I figured it was him being a prick to everyone who was drunk. I checked my phone and go back to sleep. I fell asleep, and at what I think was around 3 a.m., I'm awoken by someone bawling their eyes out. and am still having a very hard time processing anything. After about 5 minutes, I realize it's Brent, and I stumble out of my tent, followed by Jeremy, and I walk out and see Brent is bleeding profusely from his nose and mouth, and I run over him, to stumbling the entire time. I am then hit in the head with a rock and knocked unconscious. Everything from this point forward is from Jeremy's point of view. Jeremy to this day is my best friend, and has told me his version of the story many times. He says I passed by a tree and a large man lunges out and smashes my face with a rock. After hitting me, the man lunges at Jeremy and tackles him straight on his ass. Jeremy at the time was 5'8", 140 pounds, and he describes the man as at least 6'4", 280. Jeremy is being choked to death by this wooded monster of a man, and he hears another gunshot from a pistol. Sarah had managed to find a pistol Brent had also brought with him and fired a shot, missing the man by a large amount. But it managed to startle him and he sprinted off into the woods. They just let him go, and Jeremy drove me and Brent to the hospital. I had 3 broken teeth and a severe concussion, and Brent had part of his tongue mutilated with a knife and a broke nose. Brent has never talked to me or any of my friends from that trip about what exactly happened when he was outside alone with the man, and refused to give the police much of a description. The man was never caught, and I have never been in the deep forest again.
Bit of context first. My cat likes to go outside every day. In the morning, he follows us out the door, takes the elevator down with us, and then goes out about his day outside until we bring him back in once we return home in the evening. Now, my cat isn't the most punctual guy, so it's pretty common for him to stay up much later in the night. Sometimes, well, for several days and nights. Or when he gets bored and doesn't play for more than 2 hours and wants to go back inside. The problem is that we're not home, so he just has to wait. My family and I live in an apartment on the first floor, so my cat's solution is to sit under one of our balconies and meow at the top of his lungs to get our attention. When we were home, it works perfectly fine, but we were not, it's a lot less effective. So our solution was to gently ask our neighbors that they have a key to our apartment to bring him up so he doesn't have to wait outside all day. Those that don't have a key sometimes let him inside the building so he's not literally outside, for example when it's raining. Our apartment is a bit special because it's bigger than most others, so to get inside, there are 2 ways when you can get in the main hall. Number 1, take the stairs to the left and open the door that has 2 locks. Number 2, use the elevator with a special key that goes directly inside our apartment, and the only door has 1 lock. The cat is used to the second option, and me too because we're both lazy. But when the neighbors that don't have the key let him inside the building, he goes up the stairs and waits. Since I usually use the elevator from the parking lot, 2 floors below, that means I don't see him waiting in the hall, and he meows outside the door to get me to open up for him, or my dad or my mom. All around, we have our habits with our parents and neighbors, and it works fairly well. Now you know how everything goes with my little guy. Anyway, here's what happened a while ago. My parents like the outdoors very much, so I'm usually left alone in the weekends. Generally, it means taking care of the chores and inviting my friends over so we can have the apartment to ourselves, which is pretty nice. This time, I was alone. It was late, 11 p.m.-ish, and I was just chilling in the living room before hearing meowing over the sound of the TV. Someone let my cat out in the building, and he's waiting outside the door. I took my keys and started opening the first lock. I don't know about the other owner's pets, but I know my cat's meows by heart. It's a kind of rising meow. That's very high pitched, but very cute. And that also has a specific rhythm because I've been hearing it nearly every day for 5 years. So I stopped. The noise isn't what it usually is. It's too deep, just off. This isn't my cat outside my door. And he's the only cat around that knows he has to wait by the door and scream to be let inside. By that point, I had already stopped halfway through opening the door and waiting to hear him again and notice scratching. My cat never scratches the door. At that point, I'm super weirded out by the situation, but the meowing is getting super loud, and I didn't want the neighbors to be woken up, so I continued with my key, and suddenly, I heard another noise that freaked me out. A cough. For the record, I'm a very cautious person, and in my whole 20 years of living in this apartment, I must have looked into the people. A total of maybe 5 times, but a small part of my brain told me to do it that night. And thank God I did. So I let go of my keys and put my eye against the door and saw it. A man standing out there, fucking meowing at my front door. To say that I was terrified is really an understatement, but my heart stopped. I just stood there petrified for what felt like an hour. I don't really know how long it took for me to move again, but eventually my body just took over, I guess. I did what you expected, ran for my phone, stood in the corner of the living room, and called the police. By the time they came, there was nobody in the front door. I can't even remember when the meowing stopped, and they just took my testimony before telling me to be cautious and left. To this day, I still don't know what that meowing guy wanted. I'm not sure I want to anyway. I also don't know how he got inside the building, since you need a key to access it, and how he knew that I would open the door if he imitated my cat in front of it. At least, I will be careful from now on. And my cat eventually came back since then. He's sleeping on my bed as I'm writing this.
So just over 10 years ago, I was fresh out of college and had moved back to my parents' house for the free rent/food for 9 months or so before I was leaving the state for graduate school. Now my parents are super chill and gave me my own space in the house, but being a 22-year-old single guy and living at a house in the sticks, they had just recently moved about 40 miles south of a major Midwest city, is certainly not ideal, but I didn't have any other options, so I started looking for some work more to pass the time than to save up some money. Anyway, so summer turned to winter and I still hadn't found anything solid, but by then I desperately needed to spend more time out of my parents' house, so I took a part-time gig doing some light bookkeeping for a small business owner guy that my dad knew. I didn't really want to do it since it didn't pay much, was short-term, and wasn't even a real office setup, but again, since my parents lived in the middle of nowhere Midwest, think acres and acres of farms, I knew I had limited local opportunities to make some cash. And this guy was going to pay me under the table as well. About that same time, a friend of mine in the city said that if I just paid him $200 a month and helped clean up, he'd basically let me crash in his living room until I was ready to move out of state. That was all I needed to hear. I took the job. So my dad's friend's family had a construction-type business. They helped out with building stuff a little, but it was ultimately more focused on renting out a few bobcats and large augers they owned. Also other various drills, and then odds and ends like generators and other low-level construction or farming equipment that someone in that area couldn't afford to purchase but needed to use from time to time. This was a small mom-and-pop type thing where everyone knew everyone, and the office only opened on days that when someone was coming by, and was just generally a mutually beneficial situation for the business owners and the locals. Since I had minored in a business-adjacent area and my dad recommended me, they trusted me to go in there for about 20 hours a week and check and file the rental forms, make sure nobody missed a payment date if there was a payment plan in place, answer an email or two discussing prices and availability, etc. Super easy gig. The old building where I worked was about, I think, 90 years old and at the top of this little hill, and the downstairs used to be an old country bar until the 1970s when this family bought it cheap, cleared out the bar and fenced in the property to use its parking lot area to store all their rental equipment and gear. I could generally come and go as I pleased, work any hours I wanted to as long as the work got done, so if things were slow and there weren't any rentals for a couple days, I'd usually go in after 7 and stay until around midnight or 1, since I knew I'd be alone and could listen to music loud and take my time and all that. The office where I worked was on the second floor of the building above the old bar and looked out onto the long driveway. From my seat I could easily see out the window, and once or twice saw a family of deer or a raccoon scamper by, and I always glanced out when I saw movement since it was very noticeable. It was incredibly remote, very still and quiet, so if something unusual occurred or if something felt off, I definitely noticed it. One night during winter it had snowed a few inches, and my dad told me to stay in because the roads were bad, but I had an old SUV and more than that just really wanted to get out of the house. So I went into work at about 8 p.m. and was going to stay until just after 1. I always left the gate open at the bottom of the hill, since believe me when I say that nobody ever showed up at night since we were literally in the middle of nowhere. I think the nearest occupied house was about 2 miles down the road, and to even turn onto our short road you had to only be coming to our specific building and probably know it was there beforehand. It was a locals only type thing and very small since the family had inherited a lot of money, we're pretty sure, and kind of did this rental thing on the side. Basically, someone would never just get lost and end up at our building. So I'm jamming away to some Fall Out Boy, everyone makes mistakes when they're young, and having some coffee and kept glancing at the snow outside here and there, since our one orangish streetlight reflected onto the ground at the gate, and was causing the light to shine off the snow in a really cool, dare I say pretty way. At one point around midnight, I went downstairs to the big bathroom to do my bathroom business, and then came back upstairs and got settled back into my work. I probably did about 5 minutes of work when I glanced outside and saw a huge imprint of something in the fresh snow just below the light. It seemed like it must have been a huge dog or substantial animal had just rolled around on the ground there on its back or something. Since I didn't notice it just 15 minutes before, it had to have happened while I was in the bathroom, or maybe when my back was turned, since I would have seen that type of movement for sure. I shook it off and assumed a dog or maybe even a farm animal, this was common, was that type of area, had gotten loose and maybe was attracted to the light or something. Who knows? At around 2 in the morning I was leaving and as always got out of my car to lock the gate up. And to be honest, I had pretty much forgotten about the imprint in the snow, but when I looked down I was shocked to see that it wasn't just some disturbed snow, but it was undeniably the imprint of a human-made snow angel. If you don't know what a snow angel is, it's when kids lie on their back in the snow and push their arms and legs back and forth so when they get up it looks like the outline of an angel. I used to do this when I was a kid, so I 100% knew for sure that's what this was, and it was deliberately made underneath the light post. But it wasn't from a kid, it was from a very large person, or at the very least, a normal-sized adult wearing tons of layers of big winter clothing. I looked up and saw what I already knew, that whoever had made this snow angel could easily look up and have seen me through that window, so they must have waited for me to head downstairs to make this angel. Now I definitely would have seen or heard if someone drove up to our building, even if I was in the bathroom, so I knew someone had to have walked deep into the freezing cold and snow for a few miles, stopped in front of our building, and then do a snow angel in the small amount of time I wasn't sitting in front of my desk window. I glanced around for tracks in the snow and saw that there was one set that led to the nearby woods to the right of the building, so it was clear the person didn't use the road, but instead came from the opposite side, which made me instantly uneasy, since that side was just trees and darkness for miles and miles. I was definitely a little freaked out now, once I realized that someone had just been this close to me secretly in the middle of the woods, and I looked around but didn't see anything amiss at all, and now just wanted to get the hell out of there. When I got back in my car and drove a few feet, I realized that my boss would be there in like 4 hours, and might see the snow angel, and assume I did it since he probably assumed I kept the gate locked when I was there. It wouldn't have been that big of a deal at all, but I was young, and felt like I might be made fun of by him if nothing else. They were all manly men, I liked books, So I opened the gate back up real quick, ran over and kicked the snow around so it hid the angel, locked it up again, and went back to my car. Also, I should note this is what really happened at this moment, but I almost lied here and said something else since it seems fake. Since I assumed the average person wouldn't get back out of their SUV and not just flee in their car, because they'd be embarrassed about a snow angel, but at that time I was insecure and cared a lot about what others thought, so unfortunately this is what I did. Also, I wasn't exactly fully terrified at this point, even though it was certainly unsettling. I just thought it was really weird and could have been an illegal hunter, even though hunting at night in the cold didn't make much sense. Either way, the imprint was made 2 hours earlier and I assumed they were long gone. But that's when I heard it. When I was getting into my SUV, there was the loudest, high-pitched laughing coming from the woods. It almost sounded like a fake laugh, like the witch in Wizard of Oz or something, like someone was doing it fake on purpose to show they weren't scared of me, or how I'd react at all once I knew they were there laughing at me on our property. It was close enough that I knew they could probably see me, but I couldn't see them at all since other than the streetlight I was under, there was no illumination. After a few seconds of laughing, they stopped, and then it was just silence everywhere, except for my heart beating through my ears. Then the laughing started again, though louder this time, more like screaming and laughing combined. I sort of froze for just like 5 seconds, listening in a panic. Now I spent a lot of time in that area, and I know what coyotes and foxes sound like at night with their high-pitched screeches during mating season, so I can't completely logistically rule that out. But to me it honestly felt like it was an adult man trying to emulate a woman laughing, like someone was deliberately trying to make a fake scary shriek laugh in order to scare someone. Well, it fucking worked. After that 5 seconds, I immediately, filled with adrenaline, got in my car and drove the hell away from there as fast I could without sliding off the road. Back at home, I was up all night trying to figure it out and told my parents the story when they woke up. After talking it out, we all decided it was one of two things. It was either my brain somehow convinced itself that the snow formation was angel-shaped when it was really just caused by some animal, and then the snow tracks and laughing was just a coyote or red fox. Though I don't think that's what it was. What I truly believe, the second thing, which is that some local was out walking around for some reason and decided to mess with me. I didn't have any close friends left in that area that would do this, and if they did, they would certainly have brought it up to make fun of me for speeding away in terror. I found out later that nearest house was a super old couple, so I highly doubt that it was one of them, which means whomever it was went out in the woods in the night in the freezing cold just to mess with a stranger. I don't have any mental issues or a family history of them, didn't do drugs. I drank socially at that time, but certainly didn't that night. I also don't believe in the paranormal, so I never once gave that a thought. In my heart, I know someone was out there. I worked there another 6 weeks or so and never had a single issue, though I knew where my boss kept his gun, and I always made sure it was there when I started my shift. And I certainly always locked the gate from then on. Thinking about this experience that night, the part that freaked me out the most was that he had to have waited around for me to leave for about 2 hours just to do that laugh. He didn't know me, I could have been crazy, and the type of person to get mad and try to find and attack him, yet he didn't seem scared or to care while he tried to mess with me. For some random dude, this is probably a story he tells from his point of view to make all his friends giggle hysterically, but for me, that dude, the one I call Angel in the Snow guy, the one with the laugh I'll never forget, let's not meet. I used to have a boy living next door to me that was obsessed with me. His name was Joey. Every time I would go outside, Joey would come outside as well as if he were watching me through his windows waiting for me. He was 17 and very weird, and he didn't seem to have any friends as he was always home. I tried to give every sign possible that I didn't like this guy, but he wouldn't get the message. So I had to finally just tell him one day that I don't like him and to leave me alone. The look on his face that day is something that won't leave me. It was the kind of angry look a toddler gives their parents when they can't have a toy. Coming from a 17-year-old, that's much more disturbing. One night my parents left me to watch the house. I was working on a school project when I felt my bed shift a little bit. I looked under my bed. I screamed as I saw Joey laying under my bed. I ran away while he tried to crawl out from under my bed. I ran to his house and rang the bell at least 10 times, telling his parents about it when they opened the door. Joey never came out of my house, so I called the police. His parents begged me not to, but I ignored them. The police found him still in my room and arrested him. Apparently, he admitted this wasn't the first time he had hid under my bed. They also found pictures of me scattered across his room. The most disturbing one was of me sleeping, and it was taken from inside my room. It was very common for me to be home alone at night as I only lived with my dad, and his shifts would constantly shift from days to nights. This happened around the time my dad was doing night shifts. I would stay up really late on these nights watching movies. It's always taken me a long time to fall asleep, so after turning off the TV to go to sleep, I probably laid there for a good half hour, then I heard a toy fall over in my toy closet. It was nothing too suspicious, but it still creeped me out. But then, the doorknob to my closet started to wiggle. Until finally unlocking the door, I hid under my covers, not making a sound. It was strangely quiet for a good 2 minutes. So I finally peeked my head out of the covers. There was a figure standing next to my bed, looking down. I screamed at the top of my lungs and began hugging the wall behind me. The figure looked out the window and then just walked away out of the room. I stayed in that position for like an hour. Before checking if he was really gone, the front door was left wide open, so it seemed he had left. I didn't get a minute of sleep that night. So me and a couple of my buddies went camping last summer alongside the Willamette River. We actually had a decent hike into the deep end of woods. We did some night fishing, listening to music, and basically drank to the point where everything was funny later in the night. I would guess we finally called it a night somewhere past 2 a.m. I shared a tent with one of my buds while the other two shared another tent. We heard them laughing about something. At first we laughed at the sound of their laughing, but it soon got annoying and we yelled for them to shut up. One of them responded, "It isn't us." I sat up startled with the response. I came to realize that it was a sound of only one person laughing, and it didn't sound like either one of my friends. Even in my drunk state, I realized how odd it was for somebody to be out this far in the woods so late at night. The laughing gradually got closer and louder to our campout. My friend shot up and looked at me with a worried look on his face. I heard my other friends scream over to us they were getting freaked out. As the laughing got even closer, I could make it out very clearly to be the left of a male, probably in his 30s or 40s. It sounded like he was as drunk as us messing around with friends. But we only heard his laugh, nobody else. There was something indescribably creepy about his laugh, as if it was missing something. You had to be there to understand what I mean. The laughing was now just at the edge of our campsite, but we couldn't hear any footsteps at all. Now that may not seem like a big deal, but it was impossible to move through that without making noise. And finally, all of a sudden, the laughing stopped completely. We had no idea where whoever that was standing, as he hadn't made a single stepping sound. We sat there in silence, looking at each other. My friend was clearly freaking out, but he was keeping it together the best he could. Finally, something broke the silence, the sound of something rubbing against the cottony fabric of the tent. We saw the outline of the hand through your moonlight pressing on the tent. We both screamed at the top of our lungs before getting out of the tent. We ran as fast as we could through the woods, our other friends following us. After about 5 minutes of running, we somehow found our car. I actually puked from running so much before taking the wheel. I don't condone drinking and driving, but I still believed we were just in the situation. By far the most horrific experience of my life. No idea who or what the hell that was or what they wanted. A couple weeks ago, my dad came home and pitched me a small job offer. One of his co-workers was going away for a few days and needed somebody he could trust to watch over his house. The reason my dad pitched this to me was because the man's house has a big CCTV system, basically a camera in every room and then an operating desk where all screens could be watched on a big monitor. And I'm a computer science major, so my dad just always assumes that I know how to work anything technological. The man told my dad that he'd pay me $200 for the 2 days just to watch the house, whatever that meant. My dad drove me to the house and introduced me to the man whose name doesn't matter. The man made it seem like he preferred I stay in the upstairs room with the monitors as opposed to roaming the house all day. That was fine with me, though. So when I wasn't eating, I was mostly just sitting in that room with the TV on in the background and doing schoolwork on my laptop. Ironically, the thing I was doing the least was keeping an eye on the monitors. night came, I started wondering where in the house I should sleep, and surprisingly, we hadn't discussed that. So I sat back down at the desk and looked at all the different rooms on the screens to see which rooms had beds or couches. I noticed something I wasn't expecting to notice, though. The back screen door was open downstairs. I didn't remember it being open. I looked through each and every camera screen in a panic. In the living room, a closet door was open. This one I knew wasn't open earlier. I texted my dad to call the man and asked him if he came back home. Meanwhile, I continued watching the screen. On the grainy, dark image, a tall person who resembled only a black shadow on the screen stepped out from the closet. I pulled my arms off the desk as I covered my mouth with my hands in shock. As I did this, however, my left elbow pulled some heavy object from the desk onto the floor, creating a big thud. The person in the image very clearly moved their head up to the ceiling as a response to the noise. They went for the stairs, walking up very, very slowly, step by step. Meanwhile, I got a text back from my dad saying, "No, he's not. I just spoke to him half an hour ago. Why?" I got so caught up in my phone texting my dad to send help that I didn't even pay attention to the monitor. There was a knock at the door. I looked at it, and then the screens. The first screen I laid my eyes on was the one showing the person outside the door to the room I was in. When I remembered that door had no lock, the only thing I could think to do was jump out the window into the bushes below. I ran halfway down the block and then stopped when my dad called me. I had him call his friend and asked him if he was expecting somebody in the house. The man said he had no relatives or friends who had his key, or would ever let themselves into his home. So he called the cops and had them review the footage. I got to watch all of it, and it showed everything. From the moment the intruder broke the glass of the backyard door, to the moment I jumped out the window and him running away shortly after. The intruder was never found. The footage was just too dark to identify his face. Shortly after high school, some friends and I went camping one weekend. We drove to a national park, which had a campground, but we decided to camp outside the ground so we wouldn't have to worry about making too much noise and disturbing other campers. We set everything up in a nice clearing next to a bushy slope. Get a fire going, the moon comes out, and we crack open some beers. So far, so good. Around 10 p.m., we suddenly hear the sound of people walking downhill through the bush towards our camp. This puts us on guard, but we weren't too concerned because it's a popular park and we figure it's just some other campers making the most of the long weekend. We all keep our eyes strained towards the sounds, and soon enough that people arrive at the bottom of the slope. But they don't cross the tree line into the clearing. They just stop in a huddle, and it's hard to make out the details, but it looks like there's about 6 figures. Somewhat oddly, all of them are dressed in white, and the moonlight reflecting off the garments gives them an eerie glow. I can sense my friends are starting to feel as nervous as I am. My friend D tries to escape the tension and calls out to the group in a friendly way. "Hey, how's it going?" They don't reply. D keeps calling out to them stuff like, "We're just enjoying some beers here. It's a beautiful night. What you up to?" They don't reply. Eventually, one of the figures emerges from the tree line and walks towards us. He stops just beyond the light from our fire and stands there. Staring down at us, D babbles at him for a few seconds with some nervous banter, but the man cuts him off mid-sentence. "How long will you be here for?" He asks really low and slow, so we can't make out his accent or tone, but he certainly doesn't sound friendly. We were originally going to stay there for 2 nights, but I have a bad feeling now for obvious reasons, and I blurt out, "Oh, we're not hanging around, we leave first thing tomorrow morning." My friends murmur in agreement, and the guy says nothing, just stands there staring down at us. I notice his clothes in more detail now. As mentioned, they're all white, and the top was kind of a loose, plain baseball jersey, only made from a thin cotton-ish material. This is odd because that night is fairly cool. Cool enough that I can see the man's breath and he should be freezing. But whatever, he just keeps staring, and I can hear the others from his group shuffling in their spot behind the tree line. Finally, the man speaks again. "You're leaving tomorrow morning." It's not a question, we all agree, panicking now. Yes, we're leaving tomorrow." Apparently satisfied, the man turns away and walks back to his group. They all start making their way back up the slope. My friends and I say very little until we can't hear the group anymore. And even when they're totally out of earshot, we speak in nervous whispers. What the fuck was that all about, man? Some people are weird. We tried to chill out, get some music going, crack open some more beers. But we're shaken up now, and what's more, we can feel we're being watched. We think the group must be parked up the slope somewhere scoping us out. So much for a fun night out drinking and bullshitting. We're too wound up and we end up crawling into the tents where we spend the night hunker down like mice hiding from a cat. We get up early and leave immediately the whole time we're tracking back to the car park. We feel like we're being trailed. The sensation of being watched never leaves us. Once we're loaded into the car and on the road, we finally relax. Man, that was some freaky shit last night. We go over all of it kind of excited in a weird way, considering all the different theories, meth heads, occult Satanists, but would Satanists dress in all white? It's almost amusing now we're out of danger. We stopped at the town nearest to the park. It's a real bum fuck nowhere kind of place. Just the petrol station, a dingy looking pub, a closed down bank, and other retail decay. We pull into the petrol station for snacks, and the guy manning the counter looks like a bit of a hard ass. But we chat a bit, and he's friendly enough. We tell him about running into some weird people last night in the park, and he's very interested in that he makes us explain in detail what happened. After he's heard our story, I expect him to laugh it off. Oh, they were just some religious weirdos that camp out there sometimes. But he doesn't laugh. He gets all quiet and narrows his eyes. You kids were real lucky last night, he says, and that right there is the scariest thing because he's a no-bullshit cowboy type, and I can tell he's being deadly serious. We pay for our snacks and drive back to the city, never to return. I've told this story a few times, and others often come up with kooky explanations, that those weird people were ghosts or alien hybrids or aboriginal spirits or something. The white clothes seemed to trip people out. This wasn't that, though. These were real flesh and blood people we saw. There was nothing paranormal about it. I once came across a similar story to this on a forum. It happened in the USA, but it was almost exactly the same experience. Two years ago, I was called in to do the night shift from 10 p.m. to 4 a.m. at 7-Eleven since somebody called out. The store was located on a busy road in a rather quiet and rural area. During the night shift, you could expect anywhere from 10 to 20 people come in to buy a beer or something else. This one particular night, there was this one guy, mid-20s, that came in. He started making weird noises, like loud yelling noises. I assumed he had some kind of mental disability. In fact, my brother has a mental disability, so I immediately felt sympathy for the guy. He walked up to the counter without any items with his head facing me, but his eyes were looking up at the ceiling. I felt uncomfortable. I honestly didn't know how to deal with it. I tried speaking with him, but he only responded in loud noises. I kept checking if he was with someone outside, but he was alone. There weren't any cars in the parking lot, so I assumed he walked. He stood there for so long, looking up at the ceiling and making noises, that I tried to get him out by handing him a bag of chips and telling him he can go. I tried finding some kind of number to call for someone to help him. Then out of nowhere, he finally turned around and walked out of the store. I felt so horrible for the men, but at the same time I felt a bit creeped out. About an hour later, the phone on the counter rang. I picked up to hear the familiar yelling sounds of the man from earlier. It caught me off guard. I didn't know what to think other than this has to be some kind of prank. I hung up on them and was now becoming paranoid of my surroundings, constantly checking the outside through the windows. Come 4 o'clock, the person working after me came in, finally allowing for me to go home. It wasn't my problem anymore. I got home and threw all my stuff on the table, ready to get to sleep. But my phone rang within a minute after entering the door. I felt a chill run down my spine. Why would someone be calling at 4 a.m.? I could only imagine it was bad news. I braced myself and picked up the phone to hear the man again. I felt sick to my stomach as I listened to the loud noises he made. I struggled to slam the phone to the receiver. All night I felt like I was being watched, even with all the blinds shut, and I could swear I heard strange noises coming from all over my house. I refused to get any sleep until the sun came up. Weeks passed and I had forgotten about the incident, until one day when going into the basement for the first time in a while, I found that papers had been scattered all over the floor, and when I went into the basement closet, I found writing on the walls, 7. 11 had been written in Sharpie on the wall, along with the address to the 7-Eleven I worked at and my house address. The most disturbing part, I also found various kitchen knives along with a large pocket knife sitting in the closet. What started out as seemingly just an innocent person turning into something of a prank ultimately turned into something much more horrifying. He had been living down there for God knows how long, and I'm just grateful that, for whatever reason, he changed his mind and left. Because I haven't seen or heard from him since, all I can say is that man was dangerously ill. when I was around 14 or 15, so a few of my friends and I decided to go and mess around in an abandoned hospital in our town. We always did this kind of thing. There were a bunch of abandoned warehouses that we would frequent to do the usual, namely smash and break things, take pictures, etc. It was just a pretty arbitrary decision to go to the hospital. There was nothing in particular that made us want to go there, and no one could have known we were going there. So as we all climbed through the small window at the back, we stood in a small room that led out into the main hallway, with the old reception desk and stairs. Normally, people would start exploring out of curiosity before we all made it inside, but this time everyone was in the same room where there was usually an open doorway. A big piece of wood was blocking the door with no handle. That had confused us slightly because we were certain it wasn't there before. After a few seconds of pushing and trying to knock it over, a voice spoons from behind the door. "Get out!" The voice sounded like it came from the earth itself and had such a horrible sound to it. My bones practically broke themselves trying to escape my skin. Literally, I've never seen good friends push each other out of the way for their own sake. We all manically scrambled out of the small window, not caring who we pushed aside. Looking back, it seems pretty obvious it was some homeless person, but that's easily the most creeped out I've ever been. A little bit of background information. I'm a 22-year-old female, and I just moved to a small town from a big city with my dad. We moved into our house in early October of 2015, and we were having some problems with a leaky shower in the bathroom adjacent to mine, so my dad called up a plumber to come and take a look. The plumber arrived at around 8 a.m. the following day, while I was getting ready for work in my bathroom. My dad let him in, so I hadn't gotten a good look at him. My dad then apparently goes down the street to gas up his car and go to work, leaving the plumber to do his job in the bathroom. Now my bathroom is just a toilet and vanity with the door leading into a shared shower room that has another door leading into my dad's bathroom. So while I was getting ready, there was only a door between the plumber and I. I guess he figured out there was a lady in the house due to the sound of my hairdryer. Next thing I know, my bedroom door is opening and closing, and there's a very tall, very wide, very terrifying man with more legs than teeth locking my door from the inside. Behind him, he then walks 5 feet towards me and stops in front of my bathroom door. I freeze. He stands there staring at me for the longest 30 seconds of my life. He hits me with the widest grin I've ever seen, and literally looks me up and down multiple times. I hear the front door open and close, not knowing then that my dad had forgotten his wallet, and the plumber pivots on one foot in a twirly motion and unlocks my door and walks out. My dad runs into my room asking if that guy had really just been in there and goes to run after him. But the guy had walked right to his truck and left without fixing our shower, so my dad immediately calls up the company we hired him from and explains to the manager what happened. The manager then proceeds to tell my dad it was our fault that the man locked himself in my room with me because I hadn't locked him out of my room in the first place. Sorry, I didn't know I had to lock myself away in my own house in order to not be creeped on by a supposed professional. It's just terrifying to think what would have happened if my dad didn't forget his wallet. In college a while ago now, I got into a relationship with a guy. He was fine until he quote-unquote found Jesus. He quickly went crazy, claiming demons spoke to him trying to buy weapons from some shady friend we had. Fantasizing about how he would hurt people and becoming incredibly controlling and physically abusive. He nearly killed me a few times, so needless to say, I got the fuck out of there. After a few threats and really crazy behavior, he finally left me alone for a while, and I thought that was that. I was heading to my dorm after a meeting one night when I decided to pass it and go to the student union, which was only down the street, to get some ice cream. As I passed the dorm, I heard steps behind me. I turned around and I thought I saw someone in a white shirt ducked behind a big signboard. I kept walking, listening carefully. I heard something move and I whipped around again, there a person his size staring at me from behind a tree. I couldn't see very well, but it really looked like him. I was mildly freaked out by then, but I just walked a little faster. I'd hear the occasional footsteps and breathing behind me, but I didn't dare stop at all. I knew someone, probably him, was there. I knew he owned a gun and would likely put a bullet into me given the chance. He was that psycho and upset that I dared to break up with him. I walked all the way to the union, and I got the ice cream I wanted, and I just sat there in the store eating, not willing to go back out onto the unlit street in case it was my crazy armed ex. I still hadn't mustered up the nerve to head back when my phone buzzed. My heart just about fell out of my chest. I saw the message. It was some of my friends, a sweet couple. They'd been walking way behind me when they saw something that alarmed them enough to text me. "Your ex is walking around the street." They called me before I could even text back. "Where are you? Your ex is prowling around here near your dorm." He was coming back from the direction of the Union. I think he had a gun. "Was he with you? What's going on?" Panicked, I assured them I had not been with him, but someone who looked like him had been following me, and I was at the Union and was too scared to go back alone. They practically yelled at me to stay there and not go anywhere, and that they were on their way. A few minutes later, they came running into the Union, breathless, eyes wide, asking me why he was by my dorm and what had happened. This is what probably scared me most of all. The boyfriend, who is a black belt in karate and is never scared, looked absolutely terrified. He was coiled into some sort of fighting stance and was looking around frantically, afraid that my ex would appear with his gun. They told me they were taking me back to my dorm and calling the cops. They sandwiched me between them and we walked back to my dorm as quickly as we dared. The boyfriend in front yelling into the darkness that my ex had better not. Trying to think, I let the two of them into my dorm and we went up to my room, where my roommates put in a frantic call to the police as we peeked out of the windows facing the street hand side of the dorm. There he was, lurking in the trees to the side of the dorm, looking up a streetlight, reflected something in his hand, something shiny. We locked eyes and I saw a rage in them. That froze me in that moment. I knew he really was out to kill me, and that my friends had foiled him. He quickly turned and ran away through the trees. We didn't know whether he would come back and try to break in. So we called the police again, and lo and behold, sirens within minutes and officers with guns drawn combing the area. They caught him a few hours later with the .22 in his hand. He confessed he was indeed going to try and kill me if he got the chance, but he didn't want to take pot shots at me with my friends there. Apparently, since I had broken up with him, I was given over to Satan, and he had a duty to make sure I died. And went to hell. Of course, he went to jail, and later to a mental hospital, and I moved out of that dorm a week later. I just couldn't live with the thought that he would somehow break out and come after me again. I got some cop friends to keep an eye on my roommates until they could move out. I was never really the same after that. I was so afraid and paranoid for years and years. Nowadays I can go out and about without any fear, but I still have nightmares about him staring at me through the trees, gun in hand, and rage in his eyes. At around 3 a.m. one night, I was running around my neighborhood with my middle school friends. We were fucking around outside when we heard a cop car come flying up with its lights on. We dove into some woods to hide, and the cop car slowed down, put on its searchlight, and scanned the woods. We stood stone still, the four of us, until the cop car passed. Then all of a sudden, one of my friends sprints between us deeper into the woods. "What the fuck?" we start whispering to each other, trying to figure out who had just run off. When we walk out of the woods and realize that we're all there. Someone else had been hiding in those woods with us. I am in my mid-40s. This is what happened nearly 20 years ago. One day I'd visited one of my friends at his apartment, which was very old and shabby. There was an entrance to an elevator in the center of the corridor. I can't remember well, but my friend lived in unit 701 or 801 on the 7th or 8th floor. So looking at the apartment building from outside the main entrance, his house was on the far left. And one summer day, my friend said he was alone and didn't have any plans. So we called two of our friends and had a drinking party. The four of us had been drinking since the early evening and just before passing out. We all lied on the floor, turned the lights off, and started talking while talking to each other. A beam of streetlight entered through the window and was shining on the ceiling. I guess the streetlights on the first floor of the apartment complex were on. Of course, we were talking while gazing at the ceiling. All of a sudden, the white ceiling turned black, as if something covered up the line. At that moment, we looked out the window while crouching down. Someone with a creepy vibe was hanging on a steel bar outside the window. Since the light was shining from behind that person, we could not see his face clearly. Then, after making an unidentifiable gesture, he smiled, showing his white peel, and without making a sound, we were so shocked at that moment that we stopped talking and were frozen with silence. Suddenly, one of us picked up an empty bottle of wine and ran toward the window, shouting, "Kill that bastard!" But the creepy guy had disappeared. After a few minutes, we went out of the apartment to see where he had gone, but we could not find him. We could only hear his stomping footsteps, and assumed he entered the corridor and went down the stairs. Going down the stairs is the only way that stomping sound could be made. It sounded like he descended to the first floor and was walking around, so we followed down the stairs looking for him, but quickly returned to the apartment still filled with fear. At first we thought it must have been a robber or some crazy guy laughing in front of the window, but when we came back to our friend's house we were all shocked. The distance between the end of the corridor and the window of our friend's apartment was too long for someone hanging onto the still window bar to jump across. Only a crazy person would try and fall to their death. Ordinary people can't even hold on to the steel bar. We thought that maybe someone had committed suicide by jumping from the roof of the apartment and caught the steel bar while falling. So we went down to the first floor to see if a body was there, but there wasn't a single trace. After that experience, I never visited his house again. In my childhood home, I would often hear touch typing coming from the computer downstairs early in the mornings. I didn't think much of it at first. My parents worked from home, and it wouldn't be uncommon to wake up in the morning to hear my mom typing away at the computer. One day I got up and called out to my mom, assuming she was down there working, as I could hear typing. No answer. No one was down there at all. I was sure I heard typing. This began happening regularly. I figured I was so used to hearing typing from downstairs that I was hearing things that weren't there. So I didn't mention anything to anyone, figuring I was going a bit crazy. This happened on and off over a period of 6 months. The sound of fast typing, fast and furious clicking of a mouse as if someone was frustrated. One morning I was eating my breakfast, and when I heard my mom at the top of the stairs call out to me, "You're not down there on that computer already?" I froze. I ran out to her. I was amazed she had heard it too. She was convinced she could hear typing, yet no one was down there. I told her about all the times I'd been hearing it, and my sister opened up about it, hearing it regularly too when no one was down there. I wasn't crazy after all. I set out to try to catch whatever was causing it and to try to discover a rational explanation for it. I'd spring out of my bedroom to the top of the stairs, where I was able to look down into the room to see if anyone was at the computer. No such luck. Every time I got there, it stopped. I think it went on for a couple of years, and we learned just to kind of live with it, as it wasn't every single day I was down there once when the ceiling white globe in the center of the room began flashing very fast strobe-like. It then exploded and glass went shattering all across the room. I was lucky I ran out of the room when it started happening because I was scared. If I hadn't ran, I would have been hit with bits of light bulb. Around that same time, I was on the computer at home by myself, when something happened that resulted in me never being alone in that room again. I felt and heard this really sharp intake of breath directly behind my shoulder near my ear. I've never ran so fast in my life. I was hesitant going into that room ever again. Prior to that, the whole typing thing had just been something weird and a bit spooky, not scary. Still makes my heart race when I think about it today. I have never really encountered anything like this before or since all those events. I don't particularly believe in ghosts either, but I'm open to the possibilities of something in which scientists don't have a proper explanation for it yet. It's been a while since that one day that in hindsight might have been the closest call of my life. I was about 11 or 12 years old when it happened. I was coming home from school, and as usual, nothing interesting occurred until I reached my house. The house consists of 3 floors and 10 flats, so it's not a very big block. It was around midday, so most people were at work. As I entered, an unfamiliar man in a black jacket who I somehow didn't notice before followed me inside and started walking up the stairs behind me. I wasn't spooked out because I had lots of neighbors and often saw people I didn't know. The thing is, I live in a flat that is at the very top part of this building and no one else lives on that level. So when the man didn't stop at the last flat below mine, alert sirens went off in my head right away. But being an 11 or 12-year-old girl, I didn't do or say anything and just kept nearing my flat, hoping against all hope that maybe he was an acquaintance of my parents or something. That could have been the case, right? I don't recall exactly how I felt, but I know for sure I was not nearly as terrified as I should have been. I was pretty sure there was no one else home because they all usually return later during the day. I simply had no idea what to do. He was on the landing when I reached the door instead of fishing at the keys as I always did. I rang the bell and thankfully my older sister was there and opened up. The moment the man saw that someone else was there, he turned around without a word and started walking downstairs. You can imagine my relief as I hurried inside my safety zone. My sister, who was 16 or 17 at the time, noticed the man and asked who he was. I just mumbled I didn't know, and that was it. We never talked about it again and didn't even consider telling our parents. It was only some time later that I fully comprehended how things might have gone had my flat been empty. My family and I were taking a vacation to Bratislava to see some distant family. I was around 14 at the time my younger brother was 11, and my older brother had just turned 19. We were sitting in front of our relative's home that we were staying at, all our luggage in hand, just talking, when a car sped around the corner, paused, then drove right towards us, hopping the curb. It was a large car with only 2 men visible from the front seat. At this point, I can only trust my father and brother's recollection as me and my little brother went back to playing with the trees. We were quite imaginative kids. First thing my mom did was grab me and my little brother and told us to stay close and be ready to run. We were confused and asked if we were playing a game. She said yes to be clear, we're in a country we've never been to before with no working cell phones, no real weapons for self-defense, and our only connection with our family is that they were going to meet us here at this corner. So my parents and older brother were significantly freaked out at this point. The men sat there whispering to each other while my dad and brother stared back at them, discussing how to fight them off if it came to that. The men moved their gaze from my father to me and my little brother, and when my dad noticed this, he pulled out 2 knives from his pocket, flicked them open, and handed one of them to my brother. Telling him not to let them take his siblings, the men saw this, looked into my father's eyes, then turned the car back on, backed up, and drove off. We waited inside the building for another 20 minutes for a bus to arrive. My dad later revealed to us that he had also told my brother that he should try and take one of them down with us at least. My dad and brother were willing to die to protect me, my brother, and my mother. I can never thank them enough because God knows where I'd be now if my dad wasn't the man he was.
I don't live in the best area, but it's close to my kids' school and it's what we can afford. I was in line at a stoplight waiting for it to change so I could get to the school to pick up my older kids. I had my toddler with me. And while I was sitting, I heard my passenger side handle move, like someone was trying to open it. I always lock my car doors out of habit. And my car is older, so they don't lock automatically when I start the car like newer ones do. I look over, and there is an older woman aggressively trying to open my door. My window is cracked a bit for fresh air, but not all the way down. She reached up trying to get the window to go down, but couldn't get her fingers in. The woman said, "Excuse me, I need you to help me out. I need a ride." Now, I'm all for helping people, but not when they are trying to get in my car with no explanation. You just don't do that. So I said, "Do you need me to call 911? And the woman answered, "No, you need to help me. Let me in. Come on now, help me out." And she pulls on the door again. Luckily for me, the light changed and I told her, "Sorry, but I have to go. I can't help you." And I drove off, and I haven't seen her since. It's the only way to get to my kids' school, so I have to drive through that way about every day. Lady, let's not meet.
I am in my mid-40s. This is what happened nearly 20 years ago. One day I'd visited one of my friends at his apartment, which was very old and shabby. There was an entrance to an elevator in the center of the corridor. I can't remember well, but my friend lived in unit 701 or 801 on the 7th or 8th floor. So looking at the apartment building from outside the main entrance, his house was on the far left, and one summer day my friend said he was alone and didn't have any plans. So we called 2 of our friends and had a drinking party. The 4 of us had been drinking since the early evening and just before passing out. We all lied on the floor, turned the lights off, and started talking while talking to each other. A beam of streetlight entered through the window and was shining on the ceiling. I guess the streetlights on the first floor of the apartment complex were on. Of course, we were talking while gazing at the ceiling. All of a sudden, the white ceiling turned black, as if something covered up the line. At that moment, we looked out the window while crouching down. Someone with a creepy vibe was hanging on a steel bar outside the window. Since the light was shining from behind that person, we could not see his face clearly. Then, after making an unidentifiable gesture, he smiled, showing his white peel, and without making a sound, we were so shocked at that moment that we stopped talking and were frozen with silence. Suddenly, one of us picked up an empty bottle of wine and ran toward the window, shouting, "Kill that bastard!" But the creepy guy had disappeared. After a few minutes, we went out of the apartment to see where he had gone, but we could not find him. We could only hear his stomping footsteps, and assumed he entered the corridor and went down the stairs. Going down the stairs is the only way that stomping sound could be made. It sounded like he descended to the first floor and was walking around, so we followed down the stairs looking for him, but quickly returned to the apartment still filled with fear. At first we thought it must have been a robber or some crazy guy laughing in front of the window. But when we came back to our friend's house, we were all shocked. The distance between the end of the corridor and the window of our friend's apartment was too long for someone hanging onto the still window bar to jump across. Only a crazy person would try and fall to their death. Ordinary people can't even hold on to the steel bar. We thought that maybe someone had committed suicide by jumping from the roof of the apartment and caught the steel bar while falling. So we went down to the first floor to see if a body was there, but there wasn't a single trace. After that experience, I never visited his house again.
Alright, I spent my entire slow day at work yesterday reading through this sub, so now I want to share my little story. My childhood best friend, Marie, and I were around 11 or 12 years old at that time. Marie's family had their own campsite in a provincial park about 2 hours from our hometown. I would spend the entire summer each year living in their camper out there. This particular summer, I was able to go and stay with them for a week, and we were excited to spend our time adventuring around the forest. On the last night that I was there, we decided that we wanted to hurry down to the ice cream shop by the lake before it closed. It was early evening at this point, still pretty bright out but beginning to lose light. The path we took was down a short slope right next to the main road with maybe 10 feet of thick brush and trees in between. On the other side was the forest with more tall, thick brush. So, we were walking along, not seeing a single other person on the path in front or behind us. But then, we hear a sudden rustling and snapping of branches, similar to the sound of maybe a deer moving through the woods. I wouldn't have thought anything of it, but then, the sound of running footsteps follows. Marie glances back and suddenly grabs my arm, urging me under her breath not to look back. At the same time, the running stops, and I don't know why I didn't ignore her and get a look myself. I guess I could sense the very real fear in her voice, and I chose to listen. We both start to panic, getting that feeling like when you're running up the stairs after turning the basement light off. And we picked up speed as much as we can without breaking into a sprint, knowing that the ice cream shop is only about a minute walk away at this point. The path soon breaks and we are in the parking lot. Suddenly, Marie steers me hard to the left, heading towards the lake and the boat rental instead of continuing straight to the ice cream shop, and I go along with it silently, understanding that ice cream is no longer an interest right now. Marie is clearly panicking at this point, and we are both looking around, but it seems whatever scared her is nowhere in sight at this point. Marie walks up to the boat rental and gets us a kayak, and we climbed in and begin to paddle out into the middle of the lake. As we paddle, she tells me that there was a man behind us and that the man had stopped running at us very abruptly upon making eye contact with her. He had been wearing a long black coat with a hood up despite it being the middle of July, and had a terrible smirk on his face, and she swore that as he stopped running, she saw him put something shiny away in his coat. He appeared to have just emerged out of the bushes after we walked past, given the sounds we heard right before he came running onto the path. We reached the center of the lake and stopped paddling. I pulled up my Nokia brick phone that my parents had, and thank God, given me, just in case. I hand it to Marie and tell her to call her parents to come pick us up. And as the phone rings, I see her look out past me to the shore and then go pale, lifting a hand to point to what she's seeing. I turn and there was the man, stalking his way around the path that circled the edge of the lake, staring at us. We sat in the middle of the lake and watched him do 2 full laps, never looking away from us, before finally disappearing. It took a few tries to get a hold of her family, and we were freaking out so bad the whole time as the sun got lower and lower. We did manage to have someone come with a truck, but by the time we reached the shore, it was pretty dark outside. I don't know what we would have done if we hadn't been able to call for a ride. Looking back, I don't know why we didn't just go up to the ice cream shop, inform an adult there, and ask her parents to come get us then. But it worked out, and we got back safe. And we thankfully never saw the man again.
I've never had any problems with police. Every time I get a ticket pulled over, I am very respectful. None of those involved have criminal backgrounds, and I just graduated a large university with a criminal justice pre-law degree. My 2 best friends, Allie and Lena, are generally very nice people. At the time, we were all newly 21, and they are fairly attractive young women. I have the good personality. We all live within 5 minutes walking distance of each other's homes, and the town itself that we live in is just under 1 square mile. It's one of those everyone knows each other and each other's business-type towns. We jokingly used to say you could do literally whatever you wanted there because we had never, ever seen a cop, and most people have never even heard of it. It's not on most GPSs or maps. The college semester had just ended, so we settled into our usual summer routine. I would get off work waitressing late nights a town over. I would drive to Alice, have a beer or 2, hang out, and go home. If I ever had more than 2 beers, I walked home or slept there so I could get drunk. One of the first nights of summer, I was leaving Alice around 1 a.m. I turn onto my street and notice a car parked in this weird lot that is essentially just grass and dirt a couple houses down from mine. As I drive by, I see it's a cop. Whoa, never seen one in our town, so it was actually a little weird. I remember texting Allie and being all, "There's a cop on my street." Weird. Got home, went to bed, forgot about it. I went to Alice with Lena almost every single night. We don't have many other friends, or money to go to the bar, honestly. Every night I would drive home, the cop would be in the weird lot. I always saw a shadow of a guy in the car, but it's dark, usually after 1 a.m., and I'm not about to stop and see who it is. He was never there during the day. One night, following the same routine, I drove by the lot, and as I did, saw the cop car's headlights flip on. The car whipped out of the lot and sped up so close to the back of my car that I honestly thought I was going to be hit. Immediately, I'm terrified. He is dangerously close to my car. He flips on his red and blue lights, but at that point, I'm about to turn into my driveway. I turn in and turn off my car, but don't exit my vehicle. I honestly thought I was being pulled over in my own driveway. I'm scrambling for my license, nervous as hell, when I see the cop just waiting at the top of my driveway, lights turned off at this point. He sits for a minute and drives off doing way over the speed limit on a sleepy side street. I'm scared for a few reasons. I had at the time a very distinct car, my lovable old PT Cruiser with a red racing stripe to ensure I never got laid, my dad's gift to me as a 17-year-old. The cop knew my car. If I had the same routine every night and he was at least a little observant, he would see my car turn into my driveway always after 1 a.m. I also wasn't doing anything illegal. I was shaken, but decided to forget it. Texted my friends, all agreed it was weird, but whatever. He was either being a dick, or I had forgot to put a blinker on and he decided to let me go. It was whatever until it happened every night after. For a week straight, every time I turned down my street after Alice, the cop flipped on his lights, rode my car's bumper to my driveway, and sped off. It's clear at this point he is just being a dick, but I don't get the point. I was scared, honestly, but my friends always turned it into a joke, so I guess I did too. The element that made it so hard to comprehend this situation was that this was a cop, and I was younger, more shy than I am now, and really didn't know how to address this issue. This cop did have one distinct quality, his brakes. They were the squeakiest brakes I had ever heard in my entire life. You could hear him coming around a turn from across the state. He had earned himself a nickname, Squeaky Brakes Cop. This harassment happened for a week. By the third week of summer, Squeaky Brakes was gone. No one tailed me home, all was well, until my friends got their first taste of old Squeaky Brakes. Allie and I were sitting on her front porch as she smoked a cigarette. It was about 5 p.m., and we were making plans for the night, drinking on her porch alone, LOL. Lena was on her way. We were in the middle of laughing about something when I heard them, the squeaky brakes. I said something along the lines of, "I bet this is the cop coming around the corner. You'll finally see who's been bothering me." I was right. Allie laughed a little as he drove past her house. She agreed he had the squeakiest brakes in the world. He slowed down as he drove by and then disappeared out of sight. But we heard him coming back, and you could tell he was driving fast. He slammed on his squeaky fucking brakes and stopped at the end of Alice's driveway and got out of the car. He was far enough away that if I ever ran into him on the street, I wouldn't be able to ID him. He had those aviator glasses on, his little cop hat, the gun, the badge, the uniform, the works. But he didn't speak. He just stood at the end of the driveway, hands on his hips, looking at us. I mentioned earlier I was a criminal justice pre-law major, and my friends considered me their go-to-free lawyer, even though I am not, because I know just a little better what to say to cops, what your rights are. Allie whispered to me something along the lines of what the fuck is happening, so I decided whatever, we have to address this, and I called out to him. "Can we help you, officer?" He didn't speak for a minute, but eventually speaks up. "What are you young ladies up to? Smoking weed out of that funny-smelling cigarette?" It was so surreal, who even says things like that? I calmly answered no, it was just a regular cigarette, and Allie held up her box of Marlboro Reds as some form of proof. He didn't answer, just fucking stared at us. Then he said so coldly, "Well, if there's no weed up there, why don't you invite me inside so I can check for myself and we won't have any problems? Pretty girls shouldn't smoke." Problems? Pretty girls shouldn't smoke? Whatever, now I realize this is a cop on a power trip, trying to be intimidating. Allie is clearly nervous, so I do my thing and say, "No, officer, that won't be necessary. We were just going inside anyway. There are no issues here, and this is private property. I really hope you have a great rest of your day, though. Thank you." I literally grab Allie and pull her inside. I acted cool in front of the guy, but I'm nervous. What is this cop's deal? We watched as he got in his car and left, always hitting those squeaky brakes. Allie texted me that week saying Squeaky Brakes had been circling her house every night. He had stopped following me home, but he had also been circling my house. I always heard his brakes leave the end of my street when I was in bed. My bed was on the second floor directly under this huge window I always left open that faces the street. I always peeked up and saw his car leaving when I heard the brakes. One night I was in bed, heard the brakes, but didn't hear the car make a turn or drive. It sounded like he stopped right outside my window. I was tired and used to the cops' nonsense, so didn't bother looking. I was in the process of trying to sleep when out of nowhere, my room lights up. Huge bright light just illuminating my room. Honest to God, my first thought was alien abduction, until rational thoughts replaced it. I sit up in bed, terrified, and look out the window to be blinded by the brightest light I have ever seen. It takes me a minute, but I realize it's the fucking spotlight on Squeaky Brake Cop's car. He is literally shining me down with a spotlight in the comfort of my own bedroom. I'm scared, angry, confused, etc. That to me was too far. I had to do something. It was an invasion of privacy, and I realized in order to know which room is mine, he had to have been watching my house. The next night, me and my friends all met up at Alice as usual. Lena still hadn't seen the cop. That night, he must have circled once an hour when he saw my car at Alice, so Lena finally knew what we were talking about, and finally understood the nickname Squeaky Brakes Cop. We came to a weird agreement, and the agreement was that we just kind of had to deal with it. It sounds stupid, and I know he had crossed the line in terms of doing his job and abusing his power, but who could we tell? The cops? Honestly, we were terrified it would get worse if we did. In hindsight, and being a few years older now, I'm kicking myself we didn't, but we were 21 and didn't want to be involved in anything like that. It's kind of funny we can handle this, she's got a crush on us, was the general consensus. The final showdown with the cop happened the last week of summer. All summer the cop was always circling, and living in fear of this dude just became an everyday thing. One of the last nights of summer, we got a ton of beer and decided to get stupid blackout drunk in Alice Yard around a fire pit as a goodbye to summer. We had been drinking more heavily than normal, and we heard the ever-faithful squeak of those brakes. I fucking hate this guy. I really fucking hate that there's nothing else he would rather do than bother us and we never do anything wrong. Allie starts going off in this rant, yada yada. He circles once and slows as he sees us sitting in the yard. He shines his damn spotlight on us, bright as fuck, and Allie blows a kiss suggestively. He turns it off and we laugh. He speeds away. I don't want to see him again. Let's go inside before he gets back so he looks stupid coming to look for us again, is Lena's suggestion. We all agree and all a little drunk decide to run as fast as we can to the door. I trip and holding a 30-pack, fall to the ground and the beers fall everywhere. It's hysterical, we were all laughing picking them up and hear the cop coming back. He pulls up again, but we were in hysterics because my fall was so comical. He must see us just laughing, and I don't know if that's what set him off, but what happened next was terrifying. He rolled down his window, screamed, "Get the fuck inside!" and flipped on his red and blue lights. Fuck. We don't know whether he meant inside his cruiser or inside the house, but we obviously opted for the house. We ran up her porch and into the house. The cop sat there outside for a minute and then sped off, and must have been doing 90 mph on a 25 mph road. We ran to Alice's room and opened her blinds. We heard him coming, so we peeked out. He would slow down in front of her house, turn on his lights, and whip off. Slow down, turn on lights, and whip off. This time it wasn't funny, it seemed menacing, it seemed incredibly aggressive. We counted, and he circled her house 38 times. After deeming it safe, we cuddled and had more beers and fell asleep together. It got to the point of harassment that I did the next best thing to calling the cops, I told my mom. She actually took me seriously, and said in the mornings, she wakes up at like 4 to walk our dog, there's been a cop hanging out near our driveway, but he's always gone when she gets back. She said once she asked him if he could move because he was blocking our driveway and he just rolled up his window. The night we credit to the harassment ending was the night I took a stand. I'm a light sleeper and it was about 2:30 a.m. when a bright light jerked me from my sleep. The spotlight in my room again. Summer was about over and this cop has essentially ruined it for me, and I was done. I got my bearings and went to the window. I stood in it, blinds all the way up, until the cop turned off the spotlight. He didn't leave. It was a very weird, uncomfortable showdown. I grabbed my phone, turned the flash on, shoved my arm out the window, and yelled down to the street, "I really hope you don't mind me taking your picture." I swear to God I have never seen a car drive faster or peel out quicker. He was gone before my flash was even halfway done going off. He never came back. Later that night, he was sitting outside Lena's house for the first time. He was blocking her driveway. She pulled up next to him, asked him politely to move so she could get home, and he said, "I bet you want to get home." This was the last conversation experience any of us had with him, and I haven't seen him since. This might not seem too creepy, but it was an unmarked, clearly poorly maintained cop car, squeaky brakes. He had the lights, the outfit, everything, but it wasn't until after the summer that we realized that maybe this guy wasn't a real cop. And if he was, he really has no respect for his position or how he treats people and clearly abuses his authority. I still always check when someone with squeaky brakes passes my house. So, squeaky brakes cop, let's not meet, ever. It was about 3 o'clock in the morning, and I was on my way to my job at my local McDonald's to open with one of my favorite managers there with me. She told me to text her when I got there so that she could let me inside. Once I pulled in, I noticed a man standing outside of his car in the farthest corner of the parking lot. He was shooting me this sort of menacing stare. Let me point out that it's completely pouring outside. I was really confused as to why this guy wasn't just sitting in his car. I then parked and texted my manager to let me inside. Seconds later, I noticed her at the door opening it for me. Upon walking up to her, I say my usual good morning. I was stopped mid-sentence by her rushing me inside and saying, "Did you see that guy outside?" I told her yes, and she proceeded to help me refill sauces, napkins, and things like that. My manager then told me that she's going to check the security tapes just to make sure that everything during the period that the restaurant was closed was okay. Minutes later, my manager called me into her office for whatever reason. She told me to look at the screen, and it showed that the same man was standing outside. The time was 12:47. She then fast-forwarded the tape to reveal that the man had been standing outside the entire time up until now. And at this point, it's about 3:50 a.m. I ran to the front lobby, and I noticed him still standing over by his car. I figured, or was hoping, that he was probably just on something and he was waiting for us to open, so that maybe he could get breakfast. I resumed filling sauces again and making sure everything was in working order, until I was abruptly interrupted by banging at the front door. I walked over and noticed a figure right outside the front door. It was the man. I yelled that we were closed and that he would have to come back later. That didn't seem to faze him as he continued to bang on the door. I walked away, figuring that he was just being an asshole, when suddenly I heard a loud crash. I ran to the lobby to see the glass door broken in. The man beginning to step inside, I yelled for my manager and told her that we needed to leave through the back door, and we did just that. We booked it to our cars and both called the cops. They arrived in about 15 minutes and came outside the restaurant with a dirty-looking man in cuffs. They said he was hiding in the back janitor's closet with a large knife in his hand. So that's my story, and also the reason I'm never working early mornings again.
I was looking for a car to buy for my son for his 18th birthday. I was searching all the typical car websites. Cars.com, eBay Motors. They were all overpriced as expected. Craigslist was the only place to find an actual deal. About a week into my search, I found an 03 Toyota Camry. It had 67,000 miles. No accidents, no damage, and good condition for only 3,500. It seemed like a steal for such a reliable car with such low mileage. The seller lived about 10 miles from me, which was a reasonable drive. When looking for a car, I gave him a call to set up a time to come check it out. The man sounded normal on the phone. He assured me that there were absolutely no problems with the car. He introduced himself as Bob. I brought along 3,500 in cash, even though I planned on wiggling down the price as much as possible. I pulled up the dirt road to Bob's property about 15 minutes early. It was a tiny little house with a decent-sized property, only because it was a bit far from the nearest neighbours. The garage was open, so I walked over to see if anybody was inside, but except for an unusual amount of car parts, it was empty. The car was nowhere in sight. The only car on the property was an old pickup truck. I went over to the front door to check the house numbers. It was the right address. The doorbell button was missing, so I knocked on the front door. I knocked for exactly 5 minutes before deciding to give the man a call. So I dialed his number, and I heard the sound of a cell phone ringing from inside the house. I was extremely confused at this point. Now I knew I had the right house. I didn't understand why he wasn't answering. I decided I had to take a peek through one of the windows to see if anybody was inside. Peering through the glass, I couldn't really see much as it was pretty dark inside the house. I saw a very old-fashioned dining room set, but across from that, I saw somebody standing at the back door of the house staring outside. I figured that must have been Bob, so I knocked on the window, but he didn't even move. There was no gate or anything to the backyard. It was just a wide-open yard. Since this wasn't a rural area, I simply walked around the house to the backyard. I didn't understand how he couldn't hear me. When I got to the back door, I met a shocking realization. The figure standing by the door was a taxidermied human being. I ran straight back the way I came, and back to my car. I looked up one last time before driving off. The blinds to the window I had peeked into had been shut, but I could see 2 of the blinds bent open. Somebody was at that window watching me. You can probably guess I had the gas pedal to the floor the whole way home. The whole situation still makes no sense, all the car parts, the fact that there was no Toyota Camry. The taxidermied human being, the fact that there was no car, leads me to believe that whoever that man was, wasn't planning on selling me anything, and that also leads to the disturbing thought that I was very close to becoming a lifeless statue staring out that man's back door.
My friend was visiting family in the States. They lived in a rural community in Maine, and one morning she woke up before everyone else and decided to go for a run. After around 30 minutes, she turned back and started noticing a van following a few blocks behind her. She thought it was strange, so she started turning down a few streets with the van following every move. She started sprinting and the van sped up. She ran to the first house she could find and started banging on the door. No answer. She hopped the fence and started banging on the back door, and the dog in the house started barking at her, but still no one answered. She jumped into the empty pool in the backyard and hid while dialing 911. She could hear that the van had parked in front of the house, and a man started calling out to her, offering her a ride home. The dog in house was now barking like crazy, and the man left after about a minute. Police showed up and took her back to her family's place. She gave a report, and they identified the van from a nearby HVAC business which had been stolen earlier that day, and the same man was arrested in the next county at a gas station.
I'll never forget the time me and my brother snuck out past our bedtime to explore an allegedly haunted house down the block. Yes, I said bedtime as I was only 10, and my brother. Luke was only 12 when our parents said goodnight to us. I went to Luke's room and we took a couple hand-powered flashlights with us, and hopped outside through the window. Luckily, his room was on the first floor. Those hand-powered flashlights worked by constantly pushing in a little trigger that would create light inside the lens. They were noisy as hell, but they were convenient. Once we were outside, we just walked down the block, and in 2 minutes we were there. It was rumoured by all the neighbourhood kids and teens that the place was haunted. Everything about it was creepy. The older, more antique design of the house, the isolation from the rest of the houses, and the broken windows and rotting wood, it seemed perfect for a horror movie. We went around to the backyard. This was all my curious and confident brother's idea. I was scared shitless. The door was locked as expected. I felt a bit of relief thinking we might just go home, but my brother made a shocking move next. He grabbed a plank of wood laying in the grass and began smashing the already chipped window. Eventually, there was enough of an opening to unlock it and slide it up completely. We hopped inside and began cranking those noisiest flashlights. Immediately after entering the house, we both picked up on the fact that it was like 90 degrees in there, which was odd, as it was a September night in the mid-70s. There was no graffiti or anything anywhere. In fact, it was relatively empty, besides a few pieces of furniture that were clearly not worth taking along. It seemed we were the first to enter the house shockingly, or at least from the back. We went upstairs to the main floor from the little den area and continued cranking the flashlights. That's when we heard the slightest crack in the floorboards from right above us. We both jumped. I tugged for Luke to leave, but he told me the place is old as hell. It's just house noises. I stopped cranking the flashlight at this point, and I urged Luke to do the same, but he only called me stupid for suggesting something so ridiculous. Then there was another crack in the floorboards from above us. He began walking upstairs. I didn't want to go up there, but I was not about to stay down there alone. I followed behind him to the upstairs. There was a door that led to a room right above where we were standing. I begged him not to open it, but he must have just wanted to be the big, tough older brother. He began to reach for the doorknob while still cranking the noisy flashlight. But then he stopped. I was confused. I could see in the dark he was moving his ear up against the door, listening for something. Silence, then the most deafening, nightmare-inducing moment of my life. A single bang on the door from the other side sent my brother staggering into the wall in pain. Covering his ear, we dropped the flashlights and went straight out the back door and back home. We were so loud when we got back that our parents found us out. We told them what happened, but they naturally didn't care, and grounded us both for a week. 2 nights later, I woke to the sound of something from outside my window and a glare of brightness sneaking in through my slightly opened blind. I sat up, and my heart sank when I realized it was the sound of the crank to my flashlight. I stood up and looked out the window, and that's when it stopped. There was nothing but complete blackness out there after that. I woke the next day barely remembering what happened. and I still hope today that that part was just a dream.
Back in my younger days when I was still living with roommates, I had what turned out to be the most obvious of dangerous encounters. I was looking to move, and I was about to leave to see a place in the perfect location. Good price, 2 seemingly professional male roommates. At the last minute, my boyfriend suggested that he comes along as well because the place is nearby, and they'll have to meet him at some point anyway. We get there and I introduce myself, and the one roommate who opens the door seems a little taken aback that I have someone with me. I suppose it could be seen as a little unusual to bring your boyfriend, but I figured, oh well, the damage has already been done. If they don't allow me to be their roommate simply because he's with me, I can't do anything about it now. Let's just see the place. The apartment was huge. We're both suitably impressed until we turn the corner of the living room and we see it. A 2-camera setup with a light pointing at the couch. There's a guy sitting on the couch, who is introduced as the other roommate. He jumps off the couch and gives my boyfriend the same weird look. I now realize the look they were giving was disappointment. I shoot my boyfriend a very quick look of understanding, but we silently decide to continue with the tour so as not to escalate the situation. I casually joke that it's nice that they have a camera so I can videotape myself for my auditions. They both laugh much too hard and say yes, that's what we were doing. He brings us over to quote-unquote my room, and it's literally a broom closet. You wouldn't even be able to fit a single-sized bed in there. It is now blatantly obvious there was never a room to rent in the first place. I take this opportunity to get out of there by saying, oh, that's too bad I have a queen bed, and it won't be able to fit. Okay, well, thanks for your time. We get out onto the street and walk around the corner without saying a word. When we finally look at each other, it's this stunned silence. Just to be clear, this all happened about 20 years ago. They weren't filming for YouTube or anything like that. He just hugged me really tight and we went for a walk in the park.
Ever since I can remember, we've always had one of those old vintage Parker Brother Ouija boards sitting in our closet collecting dust. When I was a kid, I always wondered what it was. From the box, it seems like a horrible board game. Until one day I found out what a Ouija board really is, and immediately dug it out of the closet. I insisted on my brother trying it out with me, and eventually got him to play along. We put our hands on the planchette, and I began asking the typical cliché questions like, is there anybody there and can you answer me? Other than my brother jokingly moving the planchette around to imitate an answer from some kind of entity, there was no real response. After getting bored, we put the game back in the box. I did a little research that night to find out how to make Ouija boards work. Many people said online that the most ideal environment when using a Ouija board is in a dark room, only lit by candles. So when my parents weren't home, I managed to gather like 6 or 7 candles and convince my brother to try it one more time. I lit the candles and set them around the table in the dining room with all the lights out. We tried one more time. I asked again if there was anybody there. The planchette began to move. I told my brother to stop moving it, but he swore he wasn't. I told him to move his hand away and he did. It kept moving. My brother thought I was messing with him, but I didn't pay attention. The planchette landed on the word. Yes, I was only 9, so I was legitimately shitting myself. My older brother had to take over. He asked the question, "Are you a good spirit?" There was a 5-second pause before my brother's hand moved along with the planchette to the word no. We both looked at each other, and at this point I ran to my room and shut the door behind me, but he continued on with the so-called game. I heard his muffled voice come from down in the dining room, when all of a sudden I heard him screaming at the top of his lungs. I ran back downstairs to see what was wrong. He was holding up his shirt, revealing a small open wound that almost looked like a claw mark. He told me to set the fireplace immediately, and I obeyed. He threw the thing in the fireplace and told me to never speak of what happened to anybody. We have never used a Ouija board since then, and I don't plan to.
This happened back at uni with my then girlfriend, now wife, Sam. Sam worked at a local eatery known for being frequented by long-haul truckers. Usually you wouldn't know repeat customers as they'd just be on their way through, but one guy always caught her off guard. He was a Russian guy that called Sergey. Anytime he saw her, he would wait for it to be her turn to serve and even let others go ahead of him to ensure when he was seated it would be in her section. He seemed nice enough, but he'd always touch her hand when she placed the check and say something in Russian that her memory couldn't properly repeat for me to attempt to translate. She complained to management, but they brushed it off as, "Oh, he's just foreign and it's their custom, plus he tips really well and pays cash, so you shouldn't complain." After a few months, she learned his weekly route and said her class schedule changed, so she wouldn't work when he'd be there. This worked for all of 1 week, then suddenly his route schedule changed. Then he got more handsy, hugging when he left and staying until her shift ended. He'd continuously order some small side dish or another so management wouldn't kick his ass out. At this point, I started spending the night at her place more often than not, closer to school, and luckily I was there on the night Sergey showed up. Sam came home that night, told me he had offered to escort her Ku the idiot because the roads were icy and dangerous. Now my best guess at that is Kuda Idesh, Kuda Idiosh, which means where you are going. Strange he didn't say home or school or even wherever, but like he had a destination in mind. About 3 a.m. we're awoken by the sound of someone trying to open the door. Luckily, her apartment had one of those sliding chain locks and the door slams against the chain bracket. At this point, I'm reaching under the bed for Sam's rifle, hoping she kept it loaded. Irresponsible, yes, but hey, this was the time I hoped she'd been lax. It wasn't loaded, but I knew where the 8mm rounds were. I threw a few in and headed for the door. I moved to the other side of the room. Sam had a knife and was in the hall behind the door calling 911. The door then slowly opened to where the chain was taut, and someone slid a coat hanger around to try and undo the lock. At this point, I said in my best broken Russian, thinking it must be Sergey, "U menya Mauser, odkrivayete, umrete." Translation, I have a Mauser. Open die, in my most threatening yet terrified voice. Imagine a small child trying to be brave. A flashlight shone through the door, temporarily blinding me, before clicking off and we hear footsteps running down the hall. The police showed up about 10 minutes later and took our statements but couldn't do much else. We had no good view of the would-be intruder and no proof of who it was. Sam quit her job the next day and basically moved into my place. We may never know who it was, and to whomever it was, let's not meet, but if we do, my offer stands. This happened in the summer. It was about 1 a.m. when I woke up to strange sounds outside my window. I didn't realize what they were because I was half asleep, so I just thought I was imagining things. I was laying facing the window. I tried to go back to sleep, but I couldn't. The sounds wouldn't stop. My window was closed and still I could hear them, and there was someone outside my window talking. I couldn't understand much of what they were saying. I could be wrong though, as I was super sleepy. I was frozen and scared shitless at this point. I knew what was going on, but I was just so shocked. I hope whoever it was would just go away, but they didn't. I couldn't believe this was happening. I then jumped up from my bed and walked all my windows, and went into my parents' room to wake up my mom. My stepdad also woke up, and I told him someone was outside our house. He went out, and when he came back said it was a drunk man who had gotten the wrong house and was trying to get in. I can't understand how he mistook our house for his. I just don't believe it. But then he was gone, stupid drunk man. Please don't come to my house. I hope I never have to meet you. My New Year resolution 2012 was to get in shape again. After my first kid was born, I had lost my athletic interest, but I had every intention of getting it back. So I started running 4 days a week with my friend Hannah, who is a great runner and motivator. We would run after work, 5-10 kilometers, usually favoring the forest trail. It's the kind of trail that got lightning in the darker months of the year, so you can run there anytime, really. Once you turn on the lights, you got 45 minutes to run the shorter trails, and longer to run the longer ones. Then the lights shut off automatically. We had been running for about 2 months when we started seeing the same man hanging around the parking lot every time we got there. Thin man, 25, 30 years of age, always dressed in sports clothes but never actually running. He never looked you in the eye either. We speculated that he could be homeless camping nearby because he was constantly there. We got used to seeing him, sitting somewhere close by, silently and always on his own. We felt sorry for him. He never seemed to talk to anyone or interact at all. But there was something about him that made us hesitate to talk to him or ask if he was okay. Can't pinpoint what it was, but something wasn't completely right with him. One evening, Hannah didn't make it to our run, and I decided to go on my own. I arrived at the parking lot, my car being the only car there. I did some stretching, turned on the lights, and set off on the 5 kilometers trail. I hadn't seen the thin, silent man when I started my run. Perhaps it was getting too cold to sit there now that it was autumn, dark, and getting closer to the freezing point. He must have been there, though, somewhere in the shadows, because when I got to the top of the first steep hill, I could hear heavy breathing somewhere behind me. I look over my shoulder and I see him. He is running like a man obsessed, in regular shoes, not running shoes, with his arms moving in a really strange, stiff manner, as if he was made of metal, his hands like arrows, straight and in an upward-inward angle. Sort of like a sprinter, but more extreme, moving like a robot. For the first time, he looked me straight in the eyes, and it was the eyes of a predatory animal, and it made my heart freeze. He had never done anything to harm me, or anyone else as far as I knew, but the look in his eyes alone was enough to let me know that I was facing a serious, serious threat. I started running faster, trying to create distance. Between us and I could hear his heavy breathing getting even more strained. I ran like my life depended on it, adrenaline pumping through my body and giving me new strength. I tore off my necklace and threw it on the ground, thinking, I must leave a trace if he takes me, something must be left behind. I tried screaming, hoping someone would be close enough to hear me, but I couldn't scream my lungs out and keep up the phase at the same time. Why is he doing this? What does he want? Who is he? I thought as I started to feel my lungs burn. Then I thought of my 15-month-old daughter and ran until I could taste blood in my mouth. He was still behind me, maybe 100 meters behind now, but I figured that if I trip and fall, or run out of energy, or fumble with the car keys once I reach the parking lot, then I'm screwed. So once I reached the sharp turn on the trail, I went off the trail and ran straight into the dark woods. I ran only a short distance and then I laid down flat on my stomach, my hands searching for a rock to defend myself with if he found me. I realized that I was wearing bright running clothes with reflexes and neon coloring. I had ever felt so visible in the dark before. I could hear him reach the turn and thank God, keep on running. I started to slowly, and as silently as possible, move further into the darkness. My heart sank again as I heard rapid footsteps closing in from the trail. He had realized that I must have gone off the trail once he saw that there was no sign of me ahead. He stopped, and I stopped. I could imagine him listening for any sound, and I held my breath and begged a God I don't believe in to make him go away. After a while, I heard him say something in a language I didn't recognize and walk off. I didn't move. I feared that he would wait for me by the car and realized that I had to get off the trail and onto the main road and stop someone. I couldn't go back to the parking lot. I started to make my way further into the woods, knowing that I would eventually end up on the last part of the long tail and close to the main road. The lights on the trail suddenly shut off. That made me calmer at first. The dark was a comfort and protection. But then, after only a few moments, it switched on again. This could mean that another person had just started their run, and soon I would have someone there to help me, or that he was out looking for me, or getting ready to prey on another lonely runner. I decided against waiting to find out, and continued my way towards the main road. It was dark, and I fell multiple times, my clothes getting wet from the damp vegetation, and I started to get cold. After what felt like a lifetime, I could see the 10 kilometers trail ahead, and knew I was close to the main road. Soon I could hear the traffic. Once I made it to the road, I must have looked like I had been in a terrible accident. Blood from several small cut from the falling, my clothes dirty, and my face, I assume, petrified. My bright runner's shirt soon attracted the attention of a passing car. My waving and desperate shouting made it stop. The driver, a 40-ish man with his 2 kids in the back seat, spent the next 10 minutes or so trying to make sense of what I tried to say between the sobbing and the crying. He asked if I wanted a lift back to the parking lot, and I told him no. Please take me home instead. At home, my husband insisted on going to the parking lot to retrieve the car and calling the police. And report what? I asked. No crime had been committed, I just knew that he was out to get me. My husband went back for the car. The driver's seat window was smashed and my phone was gone. So was the photo of my daughter that I had had hanging from the mirror. I don't know what he was trying to do or why he chased me the way he did, but the look in his eyes, there was no doubt he had bad intentions. Creepy forest trail man, let's never meet again. My school's library is open until around 2 in the morning for the idiots like me who don't do their essays until the last minute. It's a pretty small building, and most of the books are in the basement area called the stacks. Just to give you a quick layout, there's the big main stairs that go down to the stacks, a vending machine room, and the long hallway with 4 entrances into the stacks. The stacks are 2 really big rooms on opposite sides of the hallway with a huge amount of bookshelves and study desks lining the walls. I was there around 11 p.m. last year. It was a pretty research-intensive essay, so I was down in the stacks working in one of the study desks, so I didn't have to keep going upstairs and downstairs again. I had been there for maybe 2 hours, and everyone except for a boy working a few desks down from me had left already. I was pretty zoned out by this point. It was an 8 a.m. class, so I didn't have much time until it was due, and I was sort of panicking, so it really pissed me off when I heard someone flipping through book pages really fast to make them do that loud whir noise at the other end of the room. I sort of ignored it for a while, thinking they'd go away eventually, but they just kept doing it. After about 5 minutes, I got sick of it and started to walk over to tell them to knock it off. I get about 3 steps across the room, and it just stopped. I sat back down, and it was quiet again for like 10 more minutes before the flipping pages noise started again, only loads louder, like they'd grabbed a huge book that time. The boy started to get pissed off too, and he stood up and started walking through the bookshelves trying to find them. It keeps going, so I got up too and started looking around with him. It got really loud, and it was pretty obvious where it was coming from by that point, so we started walking towards it. He was on one side of the shelves, and I was on the other. We walked all the way down the shelves. No one there. We hadn't seen anyone come in the stacks, and we were on the side of the room with the entrances. No way could anyone have come in without us seeing them. The noise stopped again, and we both just sort of slowly walked back to our seats. I assumed it was just a fan or something in the other room, and I really needed to get my essay done. We sat down, and immediately the noise started again. It sounded like it was coming from right next to the guy's chair. He shoved his stuff in his bag, looked at me, said, "Fuck this," and took off. I was out of there maybe 5 seconds behind him. I still won't go back in the stacks at night, even when there's other people down there. Before I start, here's a bit of context to my story. My husband and I lived in a small 2-floor house with 2 main entrances, one along the front and the other on the side of the house, which opens up into the laundry room. When we're too busy or it's too late to walk our dog, we hook his collar onto a long line that's attached to one of the pipes on the corner of our house so he can use the bathroom. We used to do this from the door in our laundry room, but we'd noticed the large step from the door to the ground had been taking a toll on his hips. As a result, we started letting him out through the front door instead, since the porch is much closer to the ground. This particular night, I was home alone with my dog, and it was around midnight when I decided to let him outside one last time before going to bed. I hook him up to his line, close the door and lock it, before heading into the kitchen to put away the dishes. This was pretty routine. Even if he used the bathroom quickly, he liked to walk around along the front and side of the house for a few minutes before coming back inside. As I'm putting away the dishes, I hear a scratch on the door. How my dog signals he wants to come inside, so I head over to let him back in. Since I've watched way too many scary movies, I always look through the door's peephole before opening the door. Out of habit, I look to check that my dog is in front of the door. Instead, I see a man staring very intently at the door handle. I freeze with my hand on the door handle. I don't know how much time went by, but then I heard another scratch, this one louder than the last. This kind of wakes me up from my initial shock, and I run to grab my cell phone. I call my husband to tell him what's happening. He was very confused. I probably wasn't explaining the situation very well, but says that he's heading home. This is when I realize my dog is still outside with this person. I head back to the front door, trying to make as little noise as possible, to check whether the stranger is still there. Just like before, he's standing there, head bowed, looking at the doorknob. I tiptoe over to the laundry room and slowly open the door as quietly as possible. I can't see my dog anywhere, and the side of my house is covered in gravel. I knew I couldn't step outside without making a lot of noise. With my heart still pounding in my chest, I go to the front door to keep an eye on the stranger and to get a better look at him. I considered calling the police, but I didn't feel they would take me seriously, since all this man was doing was standing in front of my house. I tried taking a picture of him with my cell phone, but my camera was only able to take pictures of the peephole and not the images behind the glass. All of a sudden, the man looks up directly at me. I swear he knew I was there. He glares at me, then opens his mouth to show this taunting, malicious grin. He stood there that way for a few seconds. With that, he turns around and starts to walk down the street. I stay in the same place, almost expecting him to rush back and start pounding on the door. Luckily, my husband got back after a few minutes. Long story short, he convinced me to call the police, and we went out looking for our dog. It turns out this man had cut the end of the line connected to the pipe, and our dog decided this was a good time for him to explore my neighbor's backyard, which was where we found him. It's been 3 years since this happened. We've since moved to a new house, unrelated reasons, and the police weren't able to come up with any suspects. Ever since then, we take our dog on very long walks before the sun goes down. When my grandfather was younger, he became the principal of an elementary school. He was in his late 20s, early 30s at the time, and despite being young, he was a born leader. He was a great principal, and everyone loved him. I can attest to that as I attended multiple award ceremonies for him, and the respect and admiration he received was crazy. There was a young boy at the school who was having behavioral issues in class, and my grandfather saw that the kid didn't have a lot of parental support. So he called in his father and had a talk with him about spending more time with his son and just a general parenting session. It turned out that all the boy needed was his dad's attention, and after a few weeks he was a happy model student. Whenever my grandfather would leave school late, he would see the dad was playing basketball with his son after he got home from work. It was one of those moments that he took pride in, being able to make a difference in people's lives. However, not everything had such an easy solution, and my grandfather found himself having to deal with an employee, Stanley the janitor, who was showing up to work drunk. Stanley was an alcoholic, with a mean streak, and my grandfather tried on multiple occasions deal with his behavior. Finally, one day Stanley showed up so drunk that my grandfather sent him home and called the superintendent to let him know he was going to fire him the next morning after he sobered up. He then warned them to let him deal with it when Stanley was sober, because he was not a stable person. As it goes in these kind of stories, the superintendent was furious and decided that he was going to call Stanley himself and fire him despite my grandfather's warning. No one called my grandfather to tell him about it either, so he was completely in the dark and thought he could deal with it in the morning. Stanley was furious and went to the school that evening. He searched the offices, my grandfather's included, and tore things apart until he finally had what he wanted. He was in a blaze of fury, and on his way out, he saw the father and his son playing basketball. He walked towards them and pulled something out of his trousers. It was a gun. He then proceeded to shoot the little boy, killing him instantly. The father was so upset, was hysterically crying, but somehow managed to get the gun away from Stanley and shoot him. My grandfather was called to the elementary school immediately by the police because there were 2 dead bodies. The little boy and Stanley were dead, but what was even worse was the crying from the father and him saying that he couldn't save his son. It was clear that he would never forgive himself for that day. My grandfather was pulled aside by one of the police, who had searched Stanley for evidence. They had found a hit list of the people that he was going to kill, and all of the addresses of those people that he had retrieved when he searched the offices. My grandfather was number 1 on that list. So, if it weren't for that father, it's likely that I would have never been able to meet my grandfather, and possibly my mother and grandmother would have been killed if Stanley had been able to complete his mission. To this day, I get goosebumps whenever I hear that story, and it's just so chilling. My grandfather never uttered a single word about this after his initial recount, and my mother made me swear to never tell him I knew. He carried the weight of that boy's death on him until the day he died,